Hi, Ron. Hi, Charles.
John, have there been orientation sessions going on? I think I've seen groups of
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
there have been, Ron, all summer. They're virtual. Most of the events that are happening for orientation are all virtual, just like they were last summer. But all the good thing is all the pertinent information that we typically provide during those events where we do presentations, all have still been available to parents and students.
Mhm.
It's been great.
Yeah.
I guess we wait now.
Yeah. Yeah. When do students arrive on campus?
So the early arrivals, and Ellie will talk a little bit about this, probably around 2,000, 2,500 early arrivals will come on the 24th of August. And then the remainder of the students will start returning on Friday, the 27th, the 28th, and finishing up on the 29th throughout that weekend. So yeah, I think Ellie will be here, and she'll talk a little bit about numbers and what that looks like. So
Yeah,
she can cover a lot of that information.
I always used to hide in my office when the new students were arriving because they would ask me for directions, and I didn't remember the road names of any place. So,
or they might ask you to grab a bag and help them put it up in their dorm.
there was a faculty member who was maybe 60 years old, and he was part of the Husky Haulers, but he stopped doing that because one student was talking on his cell phone and saying to the professor, "That goes over there, that goes over there." And
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to finish up a few things, Ron, before the meeting.
Okay. Tasha, I don't know if you can hear me, but my computer my screen has been freezing, so it might happen during the meeting that I get out and come right back in.
Okay, so if you get out, it'll put you back, or you'll have to come back through the waiting room. So I'll just keep my eye on it to let you back in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We are waiting for the Finance Committee to finish up.
Hello?
And
I have about...
as soon as they get here, we can open this meeting. And my internet connection is unstable, so if I do something weird.
Okay, Rich, this is Tasha. Rich Roberts, are you the IT for streaming tonight?
He's busy putting on his Superman suit, judging by the thumbnail.
Let me just double check with Jamie and Yvette before you get started, Mayor. Let me just make sure that that's IT and we're not still waiting for them. It usually says IT.
Yeah, Rich is definitely an IT employee, unless he's signed on for another reason.
Well, it's 7 o'clock. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. can we wait just a minute for Peter to join us?
I noticed we're using Zoom now instead of the other thing that we were using before.
Go to.
Yeah, yeah. Was there any particular reason to switch or?
Better format.
Yeah.
Go to had its problems.
Yeah.
Jamie could speak to this in much, better detail, more eloquently, but suffice it to say, it comes down to features and compatibility. And when it comes, I think, specifically to hybrid meetings, imagining more heavy use of hybrid meetings in the future, as opposed to purely remote, seems to be a better platform for that.
Yeah, it's a client server issue that the go-to meetings consistently had with other areas, not just through town council, but other areas where I've had to use them and other political formats, and they always had problems. So most of the people switched over to Zoom.
All right, it's 7:01. Are we recording yet?
I will start now. Rich is that is IT, so we're all set with that, and I'll start recording the Zoom.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
All right, this is the August 9th meeting of the Mansfield Town Council. It is a virtual meeting. Again, we had a brief interlude of being able to meet in person, but we are back to living virtually. So anyway, the first thing to do on the agenda is a roll call. Ms. Chang, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Frattoni.
Here.
Freudman. Kotchenberger. Moran.
Here.
Shirt.
Here.
Shaken.
Mr. Shaken will be delayed. Can somebody let Mr. Freudman in?
He's in.
That's what I thought.
He's on the screen as in.
He's not logged in the waiting room in another device or something?
You may be not familiar with this format. Slightly different than
Can
the go-to.
somebody communicate with him?
Yeah, I'm working on that.
He appears to be here, but so I will assume that he's here for the roll call purposes. The next item on our agenda is the minutes of, he says he's logged in but not being admitted. We have a set of minutes from July 26th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Moved by Ms. Berthelot, seconded by Mr. Shuren. Comments, corrections? Mr. Osberger?
Yeah, I think the section on, let me see if I can get to it now. It's on page 4.
Can I be heard now, Mayor?
Oh, there we are.
Yes,
Yeah, but the video, they won't let me in on video. At least I got in on audio, but I'm being blocked. But my video is being blocked. I am logged in.
David, hit the button that says start video. And it'll bring you in.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see
On the
it.
bottom left corner.
Oh,
There you go.
Shoot, every time is a different set of rules. I was in from the
well, we
beginning.
have,
I was in from the beginning, but I couldn't say yes during the roll call because the video and the audio were blocked. But I was here.
we knew you were here.
Mayor, I would defer this correction to David at this point.
Yes. Are we on that?
Minutes.
I don't know. We're doing
Minutes.
Zoom, and the rules are very different. I've been to Zoom meetings, but they were very different for me tonight. Okay, are we on approval of the minutes? I'm sorry, are we?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'd like to make, well, I need help with the, the rules here. Does somebody have to move to accept the minutes and have it seconded? Because I want to make an amendment to the minutes.
Mr. Freudman, the minutes have been moved and seconded.
Oh, thank you. I was missing a lot there at the beginning. Okay, sorry. All right, I'd like to make a motion to add something to one of the items. I'm just going to make the motion, and then if I get a second, I'll discuss it. But just so you know, I'm just adding a sentence to page 4, item 9A. That's where we greeted the new police chief. So just so you know where I am in the packet. All right, so I'll just plow ahead then. Thank you. Move to add item 9A, to add to item 9A on page 4, the following, or colon. Mr. Freudman urged him not to cooperate with Yukon Housing in the harassment of student renters. That is my motion, to add that sentence at the end of the paragraph, after the word questions.
Is there a second to Mr. Freudman's motion?
I will second that.
Can it be repeated too?
Oh, with permission, Mayor, I'll repeat it.
Please repeat your motion.
Moved to add to item 9A on page 4, colon, or the following. Mr. Freudman urged him, that's the sergeant, Mr. Freudman urged him not to cooperate with Yukon Housing in the harassment of student renters.
Do you wish to speak to Mr. Freudman?
Oh, yes, I believe I got a second from Mr. Osberger. Thank you. All right. I said this. I greeted him like others did, and then spoke for a good 3 minutes, I would say, telling him that under the 2 previous police chiefs, Cournoyer and Timmy, there was a very unfortunate action being done by the police. For one thing, Yukon Housing has absolutely no jurisdiction whatsoever off campus, but they act as if they do. And I see Mr. Armstrong is here, so he knows where I'm going with this. He has an office called the Campus of Community Standards. Yukon does not set community standards. We do, to the extent that's allowed by state law and whatever ordinances or regulations we have. But with the town, with certain, unfortunately, and this is my opinion, and I expressed this at the time, so all I'm doing here is summarizing this in one sentence to keep it brief, is we have basically encouraged, in so many words, a campus official from Yukon Housing.
Point of order.
To go to student. Ms. Berthelot?
Terry, you're muted.
You're muted, Ms. Berthelot.
Mr. Freudman is making a lecturing us, I would say, on something that is distinct from his motion, which is whether or not to add this sentence or not. An argument about UConn's off-campus housing and community standards is not in front of us, and certainly out of order.
I will sustain your objection. However, the motion to add this sentence still remains on our agenda. And I will agree that Mr. Freudman did state this. The question is, do we want this in our minutes? Mr. Katzenberger.
May I continue, please? Do I still have the floor? I'll tighten it up. I think Terry had a point, and you sustained it, and I'll just be very, very brief. I think it's very inappropriate for in Mansfield we have the student renters are not exactly popular among some people, and I think it's misuse of police services to proactively go to people's houses to warn them about how they should behave. And I was just suggesting to him he should not be cooperating with Yukon Housing in any way.
The issue is not what you think. It is whether this sentence should be added to the minutes. That is the question.
You're
Mr.
right.
Bruder,
I did convey this to him, and I'll leave it at there. I told him he shouldn't be
Yes,
liaisoning with Yukon Housing, going to student houses proactively, because that's profiling a segment of the population.
You are out of order.
I'm done.
Mr. Katzenberger, followed by Mr. Bruder.
Thank you. So just simply regarding the motion to amend the minutes, I mean, Mr. Freudman did use that language, at least as well as I remember. However, I think it's important to use the term, what he termed harassment. I don't believe it is. So I think the minutes should note that this is the term he used, not a term that the council is otherwise agreed with. And by saying, I think something such as what he termed harassment. My second point is not so much for the minutes, but in fact, UConn does have authority off-campus behavior. That's as do most colleges, and that was we looked at years and years ago when UConn helpfully managed behavior.
Mr. Katzenberger, you're out of order on that. The question is whether we add the sentence to the minutes. Mr. Bruder.
I'm going to speak against the amendment to the minutes only in the sense that, I mean, we could go through each item and be real specific as to, what was said. However, the purpose and meaning for the minutes is not to have a transcript of what happened, but rather to have a summary of actions that were taken. Comments that were made by counselors are not included for a reason. I mean, we say a lot of things, and I don't think that each one of those things needs to be included in the minutes. And for that reason, I will not be voting in favor of this.
Ms. Berthelot, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll also speak against the motion. The reason I'm speaking against the motion is giving direction to the resident state troopers is very serious business. And certainly, if we were to take that sort of action, I would suggest that would be something that would need to be noticed and that we would have a robust conversation about. To leave the minutes in such a way that it appears the counselors are giving, one counselor is in a position to give direction. Now, granted, Mr. Freudman was in his rights to ask the questions and say how he felt, but that's certainly not a place for direction. And leaving it in the minutes as such would read to those in the future as if at that time Mr. Freudman was in his rights to give directions to the state troopers that they should disregard the law, which, boy, that would be a big deal.
Mr. Osberger.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to vote for this motion in as much as that I agree with Mr. Bruder's sentiments. I still feel that regards to what was spoken needs to be in the record, as that was part of the record. And if Ms. Chain needs clarity, she could probably go back to the video to get the specifics as to what was spoken. But certainly it needs to be in the record as it was part of the record.
Does anybody else wish to comment on this motion?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Shuren.
Yeah. At some point, and it may exist and I'm just not aware of it, it would be good if the council had a clear policy, very specific, about what goes into the minutes. There may be times when, for various reasons, we would want to depart from that policy for some very specific purpose of creating an important historical record. To my knowledge, we do not have that clear policy now. We have a general practice, but I'm not aware of anything being written down that says what does and what does not go into the minutes.
I do believe that under Robert's rules that what goes into the minutes is merely the actions of the body rather than a recording of statements. I would, looking at these minutes, I was quoted extensively because as part of comments of council members, which might be one of those places where recordings of comments might make sense, but the rest of the minutes are supposed to be a recording of actions and not more. Is there anybody else who wishes? Mr. Freudman, do you wish to speak for the second time?
Yeah, second time on the amendment, not on the main motion, on the amendment. And that is that, Mayor, I was glad you noted that in the paragraph just above the one with the state trooper, paragraph 8A, I mean, you were quoted in great detail, and appropriately so, by the recording secretary for half a page. That's a half a page of detailed information about what you said and all that. And you know, and I'm asking for one sentence, and I can only, I can't speculate. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to speculate why you wouldn't want one sentence put in that shows that there are members of the council who do not feel that it is appropriate. You know, imagine a town which didn't like African Americans. You're not going to go to their houses and say, we want you people to realize we have community standards here that we expect.
Mr. Freudman, you're out of order.
Well, that's what's happening here with the students.
No, Mr. Freudman, you are out of order.
I'm done. Thank you. You don't want a contrary opinion. I know that. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Chain, would you please call the roll on this? On Mr. Freudman's amendment.
Yes, Augsburger.
4.
Berthelot.
Against.
Bruder.
No.
Fertoni.
Yes, 4.
Freudman.
Yes.
Kotchenberger.
No.
Moran.
No.
Shuren.
No.
Shaken is still not here, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, the amendment has been defeated. Now, a motion on the motion on the main motion on the minutes. Is there anybody who's going to vote against the minutes? Mr. Freudman is going to vote against the minutes. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain?
Mayor, do we have a debate on the main
motion?
Mayor, do we have a debate on the main motion?
Are there any further amendments? Are there any further amendments to be made to the motion? Without any further amendments, I'm going to call for a vote on the approval of the minutes.
Point of order.
Yes?
I thought there was supposed to be an opportunity for debate on the main motion. I'd like to speak to it.
All right, before you do that, let me point out to you that we have a great deal of business on our agenda. We've already spent 20 minutes on the minutes, and this is going to be a very late night if we aren't really careful about doing things. So one more time on the motion on approving the minutes, Mr. Freudman.
I will do something I rarely do, and that is to vote no on approval of the minutes. What I'm asking to add, one sentence, was accurate. It gives a little more context. Look how much was put in on the previous item 8A, which you gave great context and it was noted. I'm asking for a little context, and it's being left out. I don't think that's appropriate. So since the minutes are a little less than accurate about what was said, and for those who say that the minutes only have to reflect what is motions made and voted on, that's the minimum required by Robert's rules. Some of our committees go into great detail in the context and the debate that went on. And even in these minutes, a lot was said about the previous item where you spoke and are quoted. So we're being inconsistent here within the same set of minutes to have such great detail for 8A, but nothing on 9A. So for that reason, for that treatment, I will put it that way, I will vote no on approval of the minutes.
Mr. Bruder?
Only because Councilor Freeman has decided to bring it up again. If my colleagues feel that there's a change that's needed to a prior section, rather than try to slip in a sentence in this section, I would have preferred to have a full revision to have it so that it was consistent. And I don't want to belabor this any longer, but what other committees and other councils do, that's their agenda. This is the town council, and our practice has been to primarily include actions. And so for that, I will vote in favor of these minutes.
All right. Ms. Chain, can you please call the roll on the motion to approve the minutes of July 26th, please?
Yes. Osberger.
Yes.
Berthelot.
Yes.
Bruder.
Yes.
Fertoni.
No.
Freudman.
No.
Katchenberger.
Yes.
Moran.
Yes.
Shuren.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
The motion has been approved with one exception. Now, I really do want to call your attention to the fact that we have a lot of business on our agenda, and I really do wish to ask people to keep your eyes on the clock as much as possible. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing on the proposed amendment to Chapter 101 of the Mansfield Code of Ordinances related to the sale of alcoholic beverages. Is there anybody here to speak to this public hearing?
Madam Mayor, we did receive one written transmission from Sam and Michelle Schifrin. Seeing that they're not here today, I believe their intent was for this to be read in the record in their absence tonight.
All right. Ms. Chain, do we need to go through the whole formality of calling the hearing before we read this transmission?
I only know with certainty that it's customary.
All right, Mr. Aylesworth, would you please read the submission for the hearing on the amendment to the liquor ordinances, please?
So this is a letter, again, submitted by the Schifrins. Dear Council, as the owners of the Kirby Mill, 114 Mansfield Hollow Road, Mansfield, Connecticut, we are respectfully asking that you approve the subject amendments to the Code of Ordinances. We also ask that you suspend the council rule that prevents adoption of this change on the same day as the public hearing and proceed with adoption effective August 9th, 2021. As the longtime stewards of the Kirby Mill, we are finding it increasingly difficult to find uses for it and to keep it protected and feasible. Although the mill statement of use was recently modified to allow for the manufacture of wine, mead, and cider, it is currently approved primarily for industrial manufacturing of machinery, which is diminishing use throughout the USA and increasingly hard to find businesses interested in this space for this use. In order to continue to keep the historic property viable as time goes on, we will need to expand the options for its use. Approval of the subject Code of Ordinances amendment and the subsequent required approvals to establish a winery at the mill will significantly help with keeping the mill viable. Again, we are respectfully asking you to approve the subject changes. Thank you very much, Sam and Michelle Schifrin, owners of the Kirby Mill.
Thank you. Is there any other, are there any other participants in this public hearing?
I have not been made aware of any, Madam Mayor.
All right, then I will declare this hearing closed. The next item on our agenda is the opportunity for the public to address the council on any item. Is there anybody who wishes to address the council?
I don't believe we have anybody here from the public to address the council.
Seeing no one. Hearing no one, seeing no one. I keep getting this little thing flashing on my screen saying that my internet is unstable. So I hope I'm still here. Anyway, then I will close the opportunity for the public to address the council, and we will turn to the report of the town manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A few items to highlight from my written report. This past week, we finalized, over the course of this past week, we finalized the community input survey related to the American Rescue Plan funding options, and many thanks to council members who sent me some feedback by email or otherwise relative to the survey. Certainly did my best to try to incorporate all those suggested revisions. Survey has been published for I think it'll be a week tomorrow, and we're at about 60 responses. So chugging along, and we're going to continue to promote that and get the word out, and try to grow that list of responses. But appreciate the feedback that we've received thus far, and it'll be open basically through the end of the month. I know I previously reported on this, so just a brief update on the municipal facilities study. As I told you all, I think at the last meeting, one particular candidate firm had emerged as a preferred firm for us to work with on the project. We had a follow-up meeting with that firm, basically to review the scope of the work. And since they responded to a request for qualifications, it gave them an opportunity really to put their first, put pen to paper and put together a price proposal for the work, which they have since transmitted to the town. That came in late last week. And staff will be meeting tomorrow to review that proposal and schedule additional follow-ups with that firm as needed. But progress continues to be made on that front. As you all know, IT has been working diligently to continue to move forward with hardware and software upgrades to help with remote meetings as those virtual hybrid meetings in the future. Obviously, as the mayor said, we've at least temporarily reverted back to remote meetings, but eventually this will pay off, will provide, we believe, substantial benefit. There were pictures included in my report. For those of you who haven't been to council chambers in the last few days, you can see a new monitor that's been added. You recall at the last meeting, we talked about how when you're at the head of the dais where the mayor sits, and basically those probably on either side of the mayor, in order to follow along on a presentation, you're obviously not going to look 180 degrees behind you. You'd have to turn about 90 degrees to look at the screen that was mounted on the adjacent wall. And so by adding this additional monitor, it allows people sitting at the head of the table to basically keep their eyes facing towards any speaker that's sitting at that table, but also in terms of facilitating the meeting, as there are, obviously a blend of virtual and in-person participants, it'll allow whoever's chairing the meeting to have a basically easier view of anybody whose hand may be going up or any other features that are being exercised in the remote platform. So I just want to extend my thanks to IT for their, again, diligence. And I think that the screen, it'll work well. And as you can see from the one picture that shows the view from the audience, the screen is pretty well tucked behind the guest table, so it's not really a distraction for people that are seated behind any guests sitting at that table. The most recent issue of the town's bi-monthly electronic newsletter was published last Tuesday, and I had an opportunity to make my most recent monthly appearance on Wayne's Norman WILI AM program this past Friday. Appreciate the opportunity to do that. The new elementary school project continues to move forward. New foundations are going in. The septic is going in. Obviously, the site looks a lot different than it did a couple months ago because of all the land clearing that's happened. But the portable classrooms, which I think were down at the time of my last report, are also down. So over the course of the next school year, without those portable classrooms that were used or have been used steadily throughout the past several academic years, the school's going to have to make do on a sort of diminished footprint. But happy to say that that project continues on the critical path to completion. A brief shout out for our Helping Hands program. The town continues to accept applications for assistance with food and childcare needs from residents impacted by the pandemic. individuals and families should contact the planning department at 429-3330 or visit the town's website under the COVID assistance tab. On a personal note, I had an opportunity to participate in my first Moonlight movie as a family this past Friday. It was great turnout. Our kids really enjoyed the feature. I think we'll be back there for Frozen 2 this coming Friday. The weather was delightful, can't argue there. But I also want to say, in addition to just how impressed I was by how together, I guess, the program was in terms of the work the downtown partnership staff were doing. I also took note of what volunteers we had down there, and I had a great conversation with Assistant Chief George Thompson III, a volunteer member of our fire department. I believe he's been with our fire department since the early 80s, I think he said. He probably started during his school years. And just a real, his palpable enthusiasm for the department. And he was talking with young kids, getting them interested in the fire service, handing out stickers and all that good stuff. I know our kids took some stuff that was offered. So just really appreciate volunteers taking their time to get out the good word and build a sense of community, because that's really what it's all about. I know these are tough times with the pandemic, but it was great to see people out, families out having fun and enjoying a nice summer night. Youth Services continues to work toward the establishment of a juvenile review board. I know this is a topic of great interest to a number of members of the council. Staff have received training, met with school staff, and discussed with other youth services staff in the towns that are part of the Board of Education, District 19. And we're going to be having a follow-up meeting, myself, members of Youth Services, Pat Schneider as Human Services Director, and Sergeant King, to talk about the role that the Rosen Troopers Office will play in this. I know that Sergeant King is a big supporter of juvenile review boards as well and has some experience with them. The library is reporting strong attendance. I believe Leslie told me that participation or attendance in various programs is starting to approach pre-pandemic levels. That was about a week ago. Obviously, things are taking a bit of a bad turn in recent days with the Delta variant. And so we may need to manage our expectations of what participation in library programs will look like the rest of the summer. But I know she's been thrilled by just the number of people that she's seen just walking through the doors or participating in a program. Want the public to know that we have transitioned to YouTube as our platform to provide live video streams. So basically, it's found the same way on the town's website that the previous platform, Town Hall Streams, was found. But want people to know we have shifted gears and we're working with YouTube now, which amongst other things, amongst other advantages, I believe has a shorter delay. So the time span, the gap between what's actually being said and what's broadcast is a lot less with YouTube than it was in Town Hall Streams. On behalf of facilities, they have a lot of projects going on right now, but one of the things to point out is they've been taking advantage or will be taking advantage of Mansfield Community Center being shut down in the near future to refinish wood floors, complete touch-up painting, and stripping and waxing of floors. And finally, I know you'll be hearing from the fire chief in his presentation here in a little bit, but I understand that Chief Mitchell met with the chiefs from the Willimantic Fire Department as well as the Dayville Fire Department regarding the possibility of starting up an EMT program at Wyndham Technical High School. So it's always important, obviously, to recruit school-age kids and bring them in the fold, whether it's an Explorer program, Explorer Post, or part of the school curriculum. So I applaud those efforts and look forward to hearing how that progresses. And the rest you can read about in my written report.
Thank you. Ms. Berthelot?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. Super excited to hear about the progress with the Juvenile Review Board, and also happy to hear your family got out to see the Moonlight movie. That's a really terrific town tradition. I have a question. Mansfield was not portrayed in the best of light on the front page of the paper, the Hartford Courant, on Sunday, where we were said to be the town with the very worst vaccination rates in the state of Connecticut. which I know from previous meetings here not to be true. And I'm wondering what the town will do to correct that information, explain that information directly to the Hartford Courant with a letter, hopefully, or and also to our community, so people have a better sense of what's really happening here.
Thank you, Ms. Berthelot. You're right. This is unfortunately something that's reared its head in the past, and I think actually two different pieces that came out in the last week. I saw something from the Patch, and then I saw the Current piece, and so we did start today basically a statement, a formal statement with corrections to make sure people understand why the numbers are as misleading as they are. And of course, there's misleading as they are because when individuals get vaccinated and they self-report their home address, not surprisingly, the overwhelming number of UConn students who count towards our census population of about 25 or 26,000 reported an address other than their on-campus or off-campus address, wherever the case may be, wherever they're living here when they attend school. They will often and most often provide their parents' address, thinking that's really their permanent address. And so when they get vaccinated, that vaccination then counts towards the totals in another community, presumably often the community where their parents live. And so the end result is what you're seeing now, which makes it look like, we have 8,500-ish residents of about 26,000 that have been vaccinated, so about 1/3. But while we can't know can't claim to know the exact number of UConn students that, what I'll say, correctly report their permanent address as being somewhere in Mansfield, in talking with Rob Miller, he believes that our actual rates of fully vaccinated in the town of Mansfield is at least 70%, if not closer to 80%. And so we are working on a statement that'll go to the Current to correct that. Progress was slowed a little bit today because I'm short my communication specialist, Margaret, who would be serving as the lead on that. But it is a priority, and I can promise you that we are going to get something out to the Current, as well as some statement as best we can for a public-facing statement to the community to address these inaccurate reports. Obviously, we have no reason to think that there's any malicious intent. It's just, and the numbers are what they are. But failing to, sort of peel back a layer of the onion to understand what's going on that's unique to the town of Mansfield, unfortunately, is leading to very inaccurate conclusions being drawn about our overall levels of vaccination.
I wonder if some of these numbers aren't coming directly from the State Department of Public Health, maybe, and not just the newspapers, but there needs to be a contact with that office as well.
I think they are, Tony. I went on the website on Friday, and that's exactly what they report.
Well, and again, it's not that the numbers are inaccurate. The numbers are accurate. It's how you're interpreting those numbers. And so I'm not sure what, a state, health agency would really do differently either. It's how the individual getting vaccinated reports that information. So really, until there's some effort, an intervention, I guess you could say, made at the front end to, help ensure that somebody reporting their address reports it accurately, it's not really a failure, in my view anyway, of a state health agency.
We could put an asterisk under it and say that there's a problem with this number, however. Mr. Shuren?
Question, do we happen to know, for example, Middletown with Wesleyan, New Haven with Yale, how other towns that have large college populations are faring in this regard?
Yeah, I don't have Middletown's numbers at my fingertips. I know New Haven is, I think, somewhere around 50%. Yeah. But of course, it's important to know that as an overall percentage of the New Haven population, Yale is a much smaller percentage than UConn represents for Mansfield.
Mr. Freudman?
I would just chalk this up to what has been referred to as fake news. I mean, last summer, we were subject to press reports that said we had a very low response rate in Mansfield with the census, because the students, you had 2,000-3,000 that live off campus, and they were all gone by by March 10th or something, March 17th, and so the forms went to their residences, and of course they weren't returned. But so it makes the town look like somehow for some reason it has a bad response rate. I put this in the same category. And yes, of course, the impact of Yale as a percentage of population of New Haven is very small, whereas the university is huge. It's like 50%, maybe more. The total of the population of the town is counted by the census, are students. So I don't know way around it, but it is very lazy reporting, and that's what's meant by fake news. They just take something and they don't show any context and explain the numbers. That's a little bit too much work. It's just easier to take numbers coming from maybe another state agency, as was referred to, and print it out. There you have it.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question of the town manager? All right, thank you, Mr. Aylesworth. Now let's move on to reports and comments of council members. I will say that even though I was in northern Vermont last week, town business continued. We continued to work with various groups who share our concerns about Four Corners. In addition, the town manager and I were in ongoing communication regarding the rise of the Delta variant and what should be done about it, and you'll hear more about that as we go on. But that's all I have to report. Does anybody else have a report or comment? Mr. Freudman?
Yes, I have a few things I want to say, especially since I was curtailed when I was arguing about the minutes. I do not believe, contrary to what another council member said, that the university has any kind of jurisdiction over community standards once you leave campus. The very idea that a UConn official can go to houses of people of a particular targeted minority, in that case student rentals, I would ask the rhetorical question if case Mr. Armstrong wants to answer. I don't care whether he does or not. Does he go over to Coventry? Does he liaison with Chief Palmer and go to the homes of student renters there? And there are other towns where students rent. There's some that probably commute in from Bolton, wherever they get an apartment. So no, we set the community standards, and I'll say again, it is inappropriate for police to go proactively to people's houses of a particular minority and say, we want you people to realize we're watching you, we're scrutinizing you, that whether you say it in those words or it's just there by implication with a police official with a badge in a uniform. You wouldn't do that I don't think you would do that in this town with other minorities. It would clearly be seen as stigmatizing and profiling. But you think nothing of doing
Point of order.
Oh, it's kind of
no. Let Mr. Freudman finish.
Yeah, I mean the penchant of other council members to keep me from speaking even extends.
Finish your comments, Mr. Freudman. Don't respond to the interruption. Finish your comments, please.
Well, I will. I do want to. That's part of my comment now. Is these are very inappropriate interruptions and disrespectful to members of a minority party. Anyway, I made my point about having the local police be co-opted. I actually think it makes the state police, and I want to be on the record on this. It actually makes them, unfortunately, as looking very unprofessional. I've been one of the biggest supporters of maintaining the resident state trooper program, even when there were people who wanted to transition to our own police department. I said, no, we're getting a good deal. They're the elite of the elite, and I've always supported them. But this is a misuse of police services. I'll just end by saying I really apologize to certain members of the council. I know that the woke progressives cannot stand contrary points of view. Now I'm done.
Just a clarification, the term community standards applies to an office of the university that enforces community standards on members of the university community. And according to their university rules, those standards are applied to students whether they are behaving or misbehaving on or off campus. I also believe that there have been equivalent reaching out to apartment complexes in Wellington. I don't know about Coventry, but I do know that that Mansfield is not the only place where students live in significant numbers and where there has been an outreach to them.
Excuse me, if you're turning this into a debate, I would ask, are you going with the
No,
local
I'm
police?
clarifying some factual statements you have made, Mr. Freudman.
Are you going
That's
with,
all I'm
in
doing.
those other towns, are they going with police officers, is my question.
Well, you can ask Mr. Armstrong that
He won't answer me.
when he makes his report, but you were misusing the term community standards, and I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what the fact of that term was.
I'd love to hear from Mr. Armstrong. What other towns do they go around with local police as a form of intimidation?
Mr. Freudman, we will get to that when we get to the part where UConn is reporting. Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mayor. On a more positive note, I had a lot of fun this weekend at taking advantage of Mansfield's parks, and as hard as I could not get necessarily all the older kids awake and out, but I just wanted to remind people, especially now that we don't have the rain, that we have such a great, valuable resource here in town. And if you go to our Parks and Rec website, you can find out more information. But I had a lot of fun doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Osberger.
Yes, I would. I'm glad to say that I had the opportunity to attend the Lebanon Fair this weekend. And in particular, I went yesterday and attended the Demolition Derby, which was very, very well attended. It rained a little bit, but then it held off. I can say that it was a good batch of music there, although not as many vendors in years past as I am used to seeing. In looking at the greater scape of fairs across the state, generally I will attend the fairs based on the musical content of the fairs, and noticing that, and especially in all the major fairs around the state, there aren't any large major acts that have been booked, in particular at the Durham Fair or the Woodstock Fair. So I think that's a reflective nature of our COVID crisis, where people were a little hesitant to pull the trigger and to get a larger act in that they know that they may not be able to perform at, unfortunately. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anybody else for comments? All right. I am reminding everybody of the time. There are no items on the consent agenda. Our old business is resuming council and council committees remote meetings. Mr. Aylesworth?
Very briefly, we obviously already alluded to this earlier in the meeting. Decision was made for tonight's meeting to be held remotely, but it is important or appropriate, proper for the council as a whole to weigh in on this and decide as a collective if it wishes to meet remotely for the foreseeable future. Obviously, this is being driven by not just increased positivity rates, but increased severity and concern over the Delta variant and what's happening in various regions of the country. So it's kind of a proactive measure, and so there's a prepared motion if the council wishes to follow staff recommendation to resume remote meetings. There is a prepared motion in the packet for you all to do that. Page 9.
All right, it's page 9. Does anybody, Mr. Bruder?
Thank you, Mayor. I would move effective August 9th, 2021 to have town council and council committees resume utilizing remote meetings until such time as the COVID-19 public health crisis enables a return to in-person meetings.
Is there a second? Mr. Osberger seconds. Do you wish to speak to your motion, Mr. Bruder?
Just to briefly say that based on the recommendations that we've been given by health officials and, in all instances of wanting to, protect everyone's safety, I think that this is a good idea.
Any further discussion? The one point I would like to make, welcome, Mr. Shaken. The one point I would like to make is that at some point we may be able to return to hybrid meetings. And Mr. Aylesworth, I'm sure you will let us know when the equipment and technology is up and ready for us to do that. Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Katchenberger.
I would just only ask, yeah, I have it on. I would only just ask, is there, I know that it was fairly specific, if that is a word, on the return date. I noticed that there really wasn't any language in there that said when we would return to regular meetings. Is that something we should concern ourselves with, or are we just going to leave it open?
I guess my thinking in crafting the motion is we don't obviously have a crystal ball to know, how the situation will evolve. So having it be sort of date-based wouldn't necessarily work too well. I think the council always reserves the right, it can be added to the agenda at any future meeting to revisit this, and you all can decide at that time whether or not to stay the current course or make a change.
So for now, just play it by ear.
Play it by ear is what I'm recommending.
Very good. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Katchenberger.
Thank you. I mean, I'm certainly going to support this motion, but I, as we've talked about over the time, I think it's important as soon as we can, that at least the town council and perhaps the other two major boards, it's up to them, do meet in person. Now, that can certainly be hybrid with comments and the public participating virtually. And it can also be in person with masks and social distancing, if that would be the best safety procedures. But I think the public should see us in person as much as possible. I mean, safety does come first, but we can manage safety in a number of ways besides the town council being so also completely via video streaming. But I do support this motion. I just hope we can get back soon. Thank you.
Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mary, for my second time. I just real quickly want to say for Council Member Katchenberger that we have the three, don't forget the council on committees, or the committee on committees. And then also, that's more playful, but I wouldn't feel in favor of this motion if we didn't have the technology support and the staff support that the town has provided for us. They make it so that the meeting is able to go through without, any hiccups. And while I agree that in-person is certainly the better format, for right now, as everyone has said, this is the best way to go.
Mr. Freudman, followed by Ms. Berthelot.
Well, of course, I'll support this motion. There's a real concern now with this Delta variant and all that. I mean, this is how, people have to feel comfortable and safe. But then I believe at some point there were comments made, I believe by the mayor or somebody, I don't know who it was, about in the future, so that could be post-pandemic, having hybrid meetings. I would just say, do what you want. Maybe that's just the way of the world, and I know I'm always behind everybody else when it comes to technology. I'm just a little hesitant about always upping the ante with the latest technology. Now, people who are from the public and they want to attend the meeting, if they don't want to attend in person, they already have an option. It may not be the best, but they can phone in. But as far as hybrid meetings go, I would just say let's be very cautious about once it's post-pandemic, let's not. It may be one thing for people from the public or presenters or staff in some cases to present remotely. I get it, but I think we have to be more cautious. Maybe draw the line post-pandemic again when it comes to the council. There's something about meetings where people kind of have to be there in most cases. So let's keep that in mind. So I kind of draw a distinction, but maybe that's a topic for another day. Right now, we're just discussing virtual meetings because of the latest turn for the worse with the pandemic. Thank you, Mayor.
Any further comments on this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to vote? Oh, Ms. Berthelot.
Yeah, just super briefly. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to echo what Councilors Katchenberger said and Councilor Freudman in the importance of, as quickly as possible, again, when it's possible, to get back to as in person, hopefully in person as possible. And that truly is a priority for open government, but understanding that we are right now in a time where there's a lot of unknowns in terms of safety, that I respect that this is a decision that needs to be made now, and will support the motion.
Thank you. Is there any further comment? Because I think we've basically beaten this one to death. Is there anybody who wishes to vote against this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain? Then I declare that the motion has been adopted unanimously. The next item on our agenda is a discussion of the changes to the ordinances regarding liquor manufacture. There have been essentially no contest about this in our public presentation, so I would be willing to entertain the motion to suspend the rules of procedure so that we can take action on this. Mr. Osberger?
Mayor, did you want me to put that on?
Please.
I move effective.
No, move to suspend.
Move to suspend. I see. Yes, I'm sorry. I move to suspend Rule 6D of the Council's Rules of Procedure.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Bruder. Is there anybody who opposes this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this motion? I rule that this motion has been adopted unanimously. Now, the second is the motion effective August 9th. Does somebody wish to make this motion? Mr. Osberger.
I move effective August 9th, 2021 to approve the proposed amendments to Chapter 101 of the Mansfield Code of Ordinances related to the sale of alcoholic beverages, which amendments shall be effective 21 days after publication in a newspaper having circulation within the town of Mansfield.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot seconds. Would you like to speak to your motion, Mr. Osberger?
Yes, I would. I feel this is a good motion. I don't think it's detrimental to anyone in town. And quite frankly, I'm quite surprised that the town of Mansfield doesn't have a vineyard at this point. And for that reason, and for many others, I will vote for this motion.
And Mr. Shaken.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to also voice my support. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Apologize for my tardiness. I had a family event this evening. And take a quick moment to be very happy and thankful we are using Zoom tonight instead of GoToMeeting. It's wonderful. But just to lend my voice and support to this, this has been a long time coming, and I want to say thanks first to Representative Haddad, who shepherded this change in statute that's outlined on page 12 through the General Assembly this year after a difficult year getting legislation passed. So thank you to Representative Haddad for that. This is long overdue for Mansfield, and I think represents something that could be a burgeoning industry here. It certainly is in Connecticut and across the Northeast, and so I'm very happy to approve this narrow expansion today. I had a question, I suppose, about whether we ought to also tonight create our committee functionality to begin to look at some of the other permits that we might be allowed to add to our permit book, and if that needs to be done just by us saying, hey, that's a good idea, or should we do it by motion after this passes? But we can discuss that maybe after this motion. But just voice my support. This is a great idea. I hope everyone votes for it.
I have actually had a discussion with Mr. Aylesworth about that as well. What Mr. Shaken is referring to, in case you don't remember, is that there are a list of various kinds of permits that the state law permits towns to adopt, and we are adopting only 3 for this piece of piece of work in front of us, because there are potential businesses that wish to apply for these permits. However, it is clear that there are some other potential uses that are possible, and in fact, you will note that in the packet we have some proposed regulations from Planning and Zoning, which would expand beyond these 3 permitted uses. So once this amendment is passed, I would entertain a motion to create an ad hoc committee to look into additional amendments to this ordinance for the future. So, but let's do this one first. If anybody have anything else they wish to say about this particular motion? I certainly wish the Schifrins the very best in developing whatever they have, whatever plans they have at the Kirby Mill. All right, is anybody going to vote against this proposal, against this motion? Does anybody wish to abstain from this motion? All right, I rule that this motion has been adopted unanimously. Is there any interest in creating an ad hoc committee to look beyond these particular uses? Mr. Osberger.
If you do form the committee, I would be more than happy to jump on there.
I saw Mr. Shakin and then Mr. Freudman.
I would just say yes. I think it's a good idea to put this committee together with a very narrow sort of charge, which is to come back to us at our next meeting, which is in a month, with a list of recommended uses that could be added to or permits that could be added to our code of ordinances. There's, as Linda has described it, I'm sure earlier today, there's a lengthy list of different things municipalities can permit for, and we ought to go through them quickly and say, here are the ones we want to add to our permit code. Just to put a fine point on it, it's really up to the Planning and Zoning Commission where to allow certain businesses, and therefore which uses to allow. Our only role as a council is to determine which permits a business could apply for. And so I would hope that this committee would work in conjunction, either through Linda or otherwise, with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Does somebody wish to make the motion? Mr. Freudman?
Not making a motion yet. I have nothing against this idea of creating yet another ad hoc committee. But I'm just asking for somebody that has a better historical memory for these things. Don't we already have, or didn't we once have, like an ordinance review committee, an ad hoc committee for ordinance review?
We created ad hoc committees whenever there was an ordinance that needed to be reviewed. There wasn't a generic committee. There was a committee that dealt with the ethics ordinance, a committee that dealt with the housing ordinance, and so on. So each major ordinance change was guided by an ad hoc committee.
So this would be a committee that would kind of not require that you have a new committee named for some specific item every time something comes up.
Yes.
This would be more encompassing.
This would be solely to look at liquor permits.
Oh, just liquor permits. Oh, okay. Thank you.
So somebody wish to make the motion? Ms. Berthelot.
Let's see if I can do this correctly. I move to create an ad hoc committee, or for the creation of an ad hoc committee to review town ordinances, to ascertain where ordinance might be changed. I need help here. Why
don't you just say to look at the list of liquor permits and allowed by state law and decide which should be incorporated in Mansfield's ordinances.
Effective August 9th, 2021.
Sarah Ann, have you got a motion that you could read back to us?
No. Thank you for checking.
All right. we move to create an ad hoc ordinance review committee for the purpose of reviewing our liquor ordinances related to the sale of alcoholic beverages to determine which state-allowed permits we wish to add to our ordinances. Does that do it, Ms. Berthelot? Does
I'm
that
sorry.
do it, Ms. Berthelot?
Yes, that does it just fine.
Okay. Ms. Jane, do you want to read it back?
I'm sorry, I don't type that fast, Madam Mayor. I apologize. We can move on and I'll catch it off the tape if you'd like. If everyone here understands what they're voting on, I can work with that.
Does everybody here understand what we would be voting on? Mr. Osberger?
Mayor, does it have to reflect a reflective date? Or an effective date, rather?
I don't believe so, because we haven't figured out how many people are going to be on it or who's going to be on it or when it starts work. So it's just the creation. We'll have to come back with a proposal for the committee at our next meeting.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Aylesworth.
I just wanted to point out on that topic, I know the deputy mayor floated the possibility of having something turned around at the next meeting in September. And while that can certainly be a goal, I just want to point out that I think one of the key staff members, in this case, Ms. Painter, she's going to be away for about half that time on some much deserved vacation. So may just need to manage some expectations on that front in terms of staff availability. Just want to throw that out there.
Okay. Mr. Osberger has volunteered to be on that committee. Is there anybody else who would like to be on it? I'm going to have to draft somebody, I think.
I think Ben offered himself, didn't he?
I thought so too. Yes, he did. Okay, so we've got two.
It was my idea, so I don't think I have a choice.
We need one more person.
Come on, Sam.
I would if I could. I just have a lot going on at work right now.
Peter? Ron? Al? David?
If no one else will do it, then I will be happy to serve.
All right, there's our committee.
I will not chair. I'm not going to chair the committee.
No, I'm going to ask Ben to chair it. Okay. All those in favor of this motion, is there anybody who's opposed to this motion? Anybody who wishes to abstain? Then I declare the motion has been adopted unanimously. All right. Next item on the agenda is fall semester update. Mr. Aylesworth, do you want to introduce Mr. Armstrong and Ms. Doherty, who have stuck with us?
Yeah, so as I understand it, it's something of I think an annual tradition to invite UConn representatives to a council meeting towards the end of the summer in preparation for the start of the new fall semester. Obviously, this year, that takes on new meaning or new importance given the state of play, ongoing state of play with the pandemic and concerns many have about what impact students returning to town may have on prevalence of COVID-19 in our community. And so we are joined by Eleanor Doherty, who's the Associate VP and Dean of Students, as well as John Armstrong, the Director of Off-Campus and Commuter Student Services. Welcome to both of you. And I don't think there's a particular structure to this, so we'll just kind of go where the conversation leads and see what you have to say. And I'm sure council members will have any number of questions.
Thank you. Mayor, if you're comfortable, I'll provide an overview of our opening for the fall and happy to take any questions.
Please.
So first, thank you for the invitation and thank you for the continued partnership. And we have certainly as a community been through quite a 15-month period. And as we reopen for the fall, I'm encouraged by our success over the past year and being able to successfully keep the university open. But I'm sure we all share a little bit of apprehension as we reopen while we watch a variant continue to worry us about the prevalence of COVID in our community. So I did hear some conversation about vaccination rates, and I will start there and certainly connect with Rob if there's anything I can do to be helpful in sharing the strength of our community. So as you know, in June, the university decided to require vaccination of all students participating in in-person learning. We are very grateful for that. At the time that we announced it, we were right around 60% vaccinated. And I'm happy to report that as of last week, we are at 92% vaccinated among our residential students. And right around, we're finalizing this number for tomorrow, actually, right around 85% overall as a campus community. So that gives us a lot of confidence entering the fall as we look at the health of our students and the very high vaccination rate that they're returning to Mansfield with. We are opening strong, but cautiously. So let me talk a little bit about what that means. As a residential community, we will be about 11,000 students. We are intentionally not opening at full capacity and holding several hundred beds in case we need to continue to care for students if there's any onset of unexpected illness. So we will have several hundred beds offline that we can use for isolation and care of our students if we need to. Those are available to all students, but are prioritized for our residential students. We will open cautiously as we open with students coming from all around the world. So depending on a student's point of origin and their vaccination status, they may need to observe a period of modified quarantine while they're on campus, or for some of our international students, a more extensive quarantine depending upon when they arrive in the United States and their ability to access vaccine. We are prepared to vaccinate right away, and we'll have capacity of several hundred vaccinations a day during our move-in period. So we feel very good that for those students who are not vaccinated and intend to be, we'll be able to catch up pretty quickly with making sure they have doses administered within the first several days on campus. Our early arrivals are going to come on the 24th. Right now, that looks like about 1,000 to 1,500 students. All early arrivals at UConn have to be fully vaccinated. The remainder of our community will come the 27th through the 29th. That's a 3-day compressed move-in period. Normally, as you know, better than I, it occurs over a much greater period of time, but we're really focusing our move-in on that time so we can do all the medical preparation and care for our students when they arrive on campus. Families will be allowed to assist students with move-in, but with controlled numbers. So it will look closer to the move-in of 2019 than the move-in subsequent to COVID. We're going to open cautiously, as I said, and I know I've said it a couple times, but you know that's coming from my concern about Delta variant. And so that will mean that everyone at UConn is required to wear a mask in indoor settings during our opening and during the first few weeks of school. We've brought back the color-coded system. We've redesigned it for a population that is predisposed to health rather than a population that's predisposed to illness, which is the condition we were in last year. But we'll open in what we're calling orange, and that is public on the COVID dashboard if folks want to see what that looks like. The goal is that we are in orange until we have confidence in the health of our community. We may stay longer in orange depending on just the health of our state and our country and our world, depending on what we know in October. And the color-coded system is designed for us to be responsive to the health of our students as we know it. So we've been pretty clear with students that we'll be opening in orange, that we'll be wearing masks inside. Outdoors, masking will be highly recommended. And I will say this is a daily conversation at the university as we keep watching the increase of Delta among populations. So that will be our opening. That will be our move-in period. That will be how we provide for our students. And we are definitely feeling encouraged by this very high rate of vaccination. As folks know, we do have students that are exempted from the COVID-19 vaccination. That was something that we needed to do, given the status of the vaccine is not being fully authorized. We needed to be responsive to that concern, but it allowed us to get to such a high rate of vaccination now. So I'd be happy to take any questions. Where would you like to moderate, or how can I be helpful?
Mr. Shuren, followed by Mr. Freudman.
Thank you. And
although, wait, just 1 minute. Ms. Doherty, do you want to wait for Mr. Armstrong to make a presentation before we respond, or should we
What's your preference, Don?
I'd like to ask a question.
Mr. Armstrong, what is your preference? Would you rather let questions happen?
It might be better to answer some of the questions that from the material that Ellie has covered, because the different information that and different questions that will come out of each.
Okay, Mr. Freudman, followed by Mr. Shuren.
Just one simple question. Maybe you were introduced before and I missed it, but what is your title at UConn? What function? Is it housing? Is it the medical?
All of that. So the introduction was accurate. I'm the Assistant Vice President and Dean of Students. As such, I am responsible for residential life, our medical care, our mental health services, our wellness services, the Community Standards Office that you were referring to earlier, John Armstrong's work and off-campus and relationships with the community, student care and concern, which is how we respond to students in crisis, and a number of other elements.
That's a lot of different functions involving student affairs that you cover. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Mr. Shuren?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you just amplify a little bit? There's been much discussion of the rather high number of personal exemptions from the vaccine requirement. Perhaps it's been misreported, but can you talk a little bit about that? People were surprised by that number.
Yeah, it is a large number, but realize the larger number is 30,000. So it's less than 3% of the population among all campuses. So the total number that has been shared in the current is reflective of all 5 campuses. It's several hundred. I think we'll probably close with around 800 exemptions among all 5 campuses.
And these are
that's certainly atypical for the university. We don't see that volume of exemptions normally. This was a measure that the university needed to create in order to acknowledge the apprehension that was there regarding the emergency use authorization. So I don't anticipate this will be a long-term measure by the university, but it was necessary for us to get to this point for fall.
Just out of curiosity, should it receive the final approval of public health, the vaccine, would this continue to be an option that students would have?
I would welcome full authorization because it would allow us to revisit the conversation, which could be as soon as this fall, from what I understand from my colleagues in public health.
Mr. Shakin.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for coming tonight. For both of you, it's been a while since we've seen you, and just want to offer my congratulations for a year one with COVID, and I think we would say that went surprisingly well, I think, all things considered, and also just offer my word of thanks for the vaccine mandate for incoming students. I think represents a really significant step forward to the public health concerns that the town has, given the significant influx of population that we are expecting to have, and a larger influx than we had last year, certainly. I have a couple of specific questions about those exemptions, because we have gotten, I think, a lot of questions about them from folks who are concerned. First, you mentioned, Ellie, that the 500 exemptions or so that were granted were out of a total population of 30,000, which is around 97%, which is a really great. That's a very high vaccination rate. Do you happen to know off the top of your head whether those exemptions were granted in a even way across the university's campuses? Should we expect around 3% of residential students at stores to have requested and received an exemption, or is the number higher in different areas? And if you can share it, what is the number for the stores campus in particular?
Yeah. And just a brief amendment to your numbers. We are not at 97% vaccination, but we haven't had 100% of our, we haven't had 3% of our total population has been granted exemption. So there's still a delta that we need to meet, which are those that intend to be vaccinated where we don't have all of their records yet. So that's why I'm reporting 92% residential, 85%. That's why we're off. And I have a feeling you're better with the numbers than I am. So I wanted to make sure I got that right for you. So the distribution on non-medical exemptions, it is certainly part of the review was to look at the distribution and make sure it could be effectively absorbed across all of our campuses. So for example, our Avery Point campus has 600 students. If they had 600 exemption requests, that would be a problem for us. So yes, I do feel like it's well distributed across the 5 campuses. The stores campus has the concentration. I don't quite have the subdivision here, but it's as you would expect. With again, the residential population, I believe we're down to less than 500 students where we're seeking resolution. So they haven't been granted exemptions. We're still waiting for vaccination plans, or a portion of that population has gotten an exemption from the non-medical process.
Okay. If you don't have it in front of you, would you be willing to share what the numbers as they stand today are in terms of the stores campus specifically? What's the exemption rate? What's the vaccinated rate? And then what's that delta where you're still working things out?
Yeah, I think what I could look at doing is when we've concluded the entire review process, give you final numbers. So final vaccination numbers, final exemption numbers, just the full landscape as we open for the fall.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I think there's a rate question, right? And I think that's how public health folks think about these things. And I concur that, I think it is likely that when students are back here, even at a 92% vaccination rate, our community, given our permanent resident vaccination rate being somewhere in the 80s at least, is, it's going to be one of the most vaccinated communities in the country, from a percentage basis, who could you theoretically pass by in a grocery store or a restaurant or whatever. However, I think there is definitely a concern in the community that I understand about the potential for several hundred unvaccinated students to be on campus. I'm sure you share that concern from a viral, from a how does the virus potentially spread perspective as well. You mentioned a couple times the status of FDA approval, and you said you needed to be responsive to it. You said that was the reason why, just now to Ron's question, that you had to grant exemptions for non-medical or non-religious reasons. Can you explain that need, as you put it? Is it a legal requirement that you have? Is there some other decision that was made given the FDA status that caused you to make that decision?
Yeah, I can actually only editorialize a little bit. The 2 factors that were important to us and to the state are the emergency authorization status, and that in the state of Connecticut, required vaccines are legislated. And in this case, that has not occurred yet. And so, a change in either of those contexts allows us to reevaluate, which we are always willing to do. And I think COVID has shown us that with every day, we think differently about how we do things. I'm just grateful we went out early in July and required.
Okay. And then my last question is that you sort of said to Ron, if FDA approval comes, you would revisit the conversation about those personal exemptions. Mm-hmm. I have heard and read what you have heard and read, that FDA is likely to offer full approval at least to one of the vaccines at the beginning of September, and the others may soon follow. And so I would just encourage that revisiting to happen expediently when FDA approval is granted. My last question is, you mentioned in your remarks the status, the orange status, and the masking requirements coming into campus, and you said something about at least for the first period of time in the semester. Can you explain or expound on that a little bit? Is there part of your plan that sort of campus-wide, safe period followed by opening things up even if Delta is still around, or are you anticipating that the Delta variant may fade? My concern is I think there's a perception sometimes that students live in this bubble when they're on campus and don't interact with the outside world, but I don't know that that's true. And I would be very concerned about a mask mandate being lifted, even if the first several weeks go well in terms of COVID transmission among vaccinated and unvaccinated people.
So I think we're all agreed we would never presume what's going to occur with the Delta variant. And, I think just in a conversation that Fauci hosted last week, the rapidity with which Delta has become the predominant variant over the course of simply the last month has us all being very fond of masking. So no, I can't tell you where we'll be in a few weeks. I can tell you back in May, I was hopeful we would have such a high vaccination rate. We'd open cautiously, we'd have masking, and we would do that more to level set because we're a global campus. And so we'd bring everybody in, we'd administer the modified quarantine, we'd feel confidence in their health, and then we could relax. I don't have that same confidence now. And that's why the color-coded system is particularly helpful for the students. So they can see where we are, they can see that we can escalate, they can see that we can de-escalate, but we do that with absolute knowledge of our health as an immediate community, but also our regular contact with folks like Rob and DPH and the state. And the state, as you know, is very closely connected with CDC. So that's a very connected, fluid conversation that is not isolated to one moment or one person in time. And I think we all know that acting cautiously is the best thing to be doing. And we also know that masking is one of the strongest preventative measures following vaccination. And so yes, I would want to eliminate concern that we would de-escalate quickly just because we were doing okay that week on campus.
Other questions? I have a question. One of my concerns is that students who are living in our community, but maybe attending classes virtually, may not have the same requirement. Is that a possibility?
The way the policy is written, it's in-person learners. However, 91% of our classes are going to be in person. So it certainly speaks to the majority of our students. And I'm finding anecdotally, even our online learners are either submitting vaccination information or asking for exemptions. And once they're part of that exempted pool and they're off campus, they'll be involved in surveillance testing, monitoring, and all of those measures that we're putting in place.
Okay. And have you had any instances of Delta variant on campus among students this summer?
Well, we've had very limited occupancy this summer. Yes. So not that I'm aware of. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. We did have a handful of cases, but I'm not sure what the variant was.
Okay.
But we did host residential programs without issue.
All right. Are we ready to move on to Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Shakin.
I had one more quick question. You mentioned testing just now. Mm-hmm. You had a very robust testing system last school year. I'm wondering if, even though folks are mandated to receive the vaccine, if you're going to be continuing with that robust testing regimen, including pool testing, wastewater sampling, et cetera, on and off campus this year.
Yeah, a great deal of our strength last year came from multiple different testing strategies. And it seems you're very familiar with the wastewater testing, which gives us a lovely measure of the community. both the immediate campus, but as you know, we were able to work with the town to do wastewater around the Oaks and those areas. And then we did do pooled sampling, and then of course individualized PCR for symptomatic individuals. We will continue with wastewater. We will continue with surveillance testing at a rate, at least upon opening, of 100% for all individuals not fully vaccinated on and off campus. We just want to be really careful. And then of course, symptomatic testing. CDC is not recommending that vaccinated individuals be included in surveillance testing, but they will be tested if at all symptomatic.
That's an interesting distinction, and I'm curious how it plays out. The sort of devil's advocate concern that I have is, with such a high population of vaccinated folks doing what vaccinated people who aren't already likely to get very sick, given their demographic, might be inclined to do upon their return to college, would create a scenario where there's a pretty substantially high positivity rate among vaccinated people who aren't getting sick, and that could create an issue for the folks who live in this community who are more vulnerable, either because they haven't been able to get the right vaccine for medical reasons, or just because even if they are vaccinated, they're elderly or immunocompromised in some other way. So I am curious to know if we do have a situation where there's some Delta COVID prevalence in Mansfield, whether it might make sense to revisit not surveillance testing people who have students who've received the vaccine.
Yeah, we are revisiting constantly, but I think we need more research out of CDC indicating greater positivity among exposed vaccinated populations. And that is a very immediate area of discovery and research right now. But I think it's most important for you to know we have the ability to flex, as we did last year. We went through, I think we started at 20% surveillance and quickly ramped up to much higher than that. And we've made the decision today to do 100% surveillance when before we were modeling lower numbers. So I am so grateful to our medical team and the partnership with Rob that's allowed us to secure the ability to be that nimble. So we have the wastewater as a common bench line for all of us. We have the ability to do pooled through our amazing scholars on campus. And we have the contracts in place to do the PCR testing we need to do to support this population. And if we need to be nimble, and it's advised by the medical team, and certainly in partnership with Rob and DPH, we absolutely will continue to demonstrate the nimbleness we did last year.
Will there be any limitation on the size of gatherings or the number of people in classrooms or social distancing or any of those sorts of preventive?
Not now, no. We're following the state's guidance. Other than our residential capacity is intentionally a bit lower than usual.
Okay. All right. Any further questions for Ms. Doherty? Then
yes,
Mr. Freudman.
Very brief question, since I just heard you say that you're following the state guidelines on gatherings, but then I think you said there'll be different guidelines, presumably stricter ones, in the residence halls. Did you say that? Is that what?
Yes, we've made the decision to keep our occupancy in the residence halls a little bit lower, so we have the ability to have enough isolation beds on hand in case we need them for our students.
That's not what I meant. I didn't formulate my question very well. If say the state guidelines, I don't know, let's say it's 10 people in a room. I have no idea, just picking a number. Are you saying that you'll have stricter guidelines than that in the rooms of residence halls?
No.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Just the overall residential population will be a little bit less.
Right. Yeah, you said there'd be 11,000, and I know your capacity is 12.5, and I believe you're always able to fill those up. As of the last day of August. Of course, then there's a certain attrition after that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. That was
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you everyone for having me, and back again this year. Every time this year I come in and I talk specifically about ways in which my office, which is off-campus and commuter student services at UConn, engages with students living not only in Mansfield, but across a number of communities: Mansfield, Willington, Coventry, Tolland, Ashford, even into Willimantic. I would like to start also by acknowledging our town manager, Ryan Aylesworth. I want to thank him for, he signed a letter with me, which the main crux of the letter is to welcome students back to living in the community in Mansfield. It serves as a point of contact when we visit students off campus. It welcomes them and encourages them to be good citizens. So, Ryan, thank you so much for signing that letter with me. It will serve us well as we visit students across the town of Mansfield. I'd also like to thank Sergeant King. Sergeant King of the Mansfield City Troopers, Resident Troopers Office, and I met. We began planning for the fall semester and planning for some of our visits that we'll be doing over the course of the next 3 to 4 to 5 weeks. Madam Mayor, if it's possible, I could share my screen, and I've established some highlights I'd like to show to the group, if that's possible.
Who can do that?
I think Tasha's driving that train, so I think she would have to be the one to make a transfer.
I'm working on it. 1 minute, please.
Okay, and I can start talking about them while that's waiting. We start off every academic year with 2 things that happen. One is a new commuter lunch. It's an orientation that we do for all of our new commuter students. And at that meeting, we talk specifically about commuter safety tips. We talk about community safety with them. That's followed also by a property manager and community partners meeting that involves UConn officials, town officials, property managers. So the first event that we start to look at with our commuters, and those are students, when we distinguish both groups, our commuters are students that we define as someone who's commuting from home outside of these communities that I've already mentioned. A student living off campus is someone who's living in a community not only in Mansfield, but to Coventry, Willington, Ashford. So these engagement opportunities help students understand what it means to be a good citizen, good opportunity when they're coming into this community, what it means to live, drive, work, operate, and engage with social opportunities in this community. The Property Management Community Partners meeting is an opportunity for all of the folks that I collaborate with and partner with to talk about the academic year, begin to talk about preparations we're making for the academic year. We will share the academic calendar, what that looks like, and highlights of when we start to see more activity in the community, and highlight those with Sergeant King. And Sergeant King is also invited to that meeting. I don't know if we're at a point where we can share or not. Our single family rental visits, they begin August through October. We will start those Monday, August 23rd. And those visits, I know there was some discussion earlier specifically about those visits and what they mean. Those visits are 100% welcome back and welcome to the community meetings. We welcome students. We thank them for being in the community. We encourage them to be good neighbors, good citizens, and good representatives of the University of Connecticut. So those, when we have those meetings, they are discussions with students. We are never at a point with a student we were talking with them specifically about how their behavior has impacted, but how we can also educate the community. So how the behavior that we have, it's been shared with us either through a citizen of Mansfield, a citizen of Coventry, Willington, Ashford, Tolland, when that information is shared to us by a community member, sometimes even by another student. When I visit those rentals, often I go with Sergeant King, many times I go alone, and oftentimes we go with the Housing Code Enforcement Office, with Mike Nintu's office, to talk specifically about ways students can look at their properties, ensure that the properties are clean, ensure that they understand what noise ordinances are in the community, understand what a nuisance ordinance is in the community. They are 100% educationally based. Our apartment complexes, so these are apartment complexes like Hunting Lodge Apartments, Celeron Apartments, Carriage House. All of those visits will begin Monday, August 30th, and they too will continue over the next couple of weeks. We'll visit students in each of those units with the permission of the properties, talk with students about what it means to be a good neighbor and good citizen living in those communities. October 4th through the 8th, we have a Commuter Appreciation Week, and this is a week of events specifically for commuter students where they have the opportunity to join in events that are on campus sanctioned by the university, that we can talk with them on safety tips. We have everything from car safety to car maintenance. We talk with them about ways of being safe when they're walking to their vehicle. We talk about transportation to and from the university. And this is an opportunity for us to help them be better commuters and understand the university a little bit better. And the final event I'll share is our Fall Festival. This occurs at Carriage House, right off of Hunting Lodge Road. It's going to be October 26th and from 2 to 5 p.m. And that's an opportunity. We have police agencies, our UConn Wellness, Alcohol and Other Drug Office will come. We have programmatic events, food events, where we can have students come from down Hunting Lodge Road, other apartment complexes, and it's a precursor to Halloween to really help students make good decisions as they go into the Halloween weekend. And Madam Mayor, that's what I have for some of the highlights for engagement opportunities that we'll be doing over the next several weeks.
Are there questions for Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Shaken.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, John. That's a good overview, and I want to just say I appreciate all the work that you do. It's really made a difference in the community over the last 5 or 6 years, at least. I have a quick sort of data nerd question. As you might be aware, the state has been counting various things as it relates to COVID-19 using population data for Mansfield that includes all residential students, when in fact we haven't enjoyed the presence of UConn students since early April. I'm curious if you have any estimates for how many in any given year, maybe not a COVID year, but in any given year, how many students you estimate live in Mansfield or off campus in general year round, and versus what the sort of influx of temporary residents, if you will, is coming in just for the school year and leaving at the end of the school year. I wonder if that's information that you track in any kind of way.
Mr. Shaken, I can share a broad overview of that number, and I can start with the bigger number. And the bigger number is for students that are commuting, and we define those two populations: a commuter student, someone who's coming outside of the community, commuting into campus, and then versus a student who's living in a community in a rental. Of that number, we're usually between 11,000, 12,000 students that are in that category. So of course, not all of those students are living in these surrounding communities. Some of the challenging pieces with having a defined number is that in our system on campus that tracks information of students living in the community, it's a self-reporting system, and it requires that students identify that off-campus address. So for us to be able to identify a very good number of what that looks like, it's better based on looking at capacities in the main apartment complexes and potentially looking at some of the single family rentals in the community. So it's a difficult number to establish based on that very reason, is that many students do not put in or identify a local address when they're putting information and they move off campus. So a student who's commuting from, we could say Norwich, which we do have students commuting from Norwich, their home address would be Norwich, Connecticut. A student who's living at Carriage House Apartments who lives in Norwich, Connecticut, their address, if you looked in that system, most likely would also be Norwich, Connecticut. Now, with that said, there's tremendous efforts within the registrar's office and within the PeopleSoft system to put stopgaps to encourage students to put a local address. So it's a challenging number to give, Mr. Shaken, and I'm not comfortable at this point taking a stab at what that would look like.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Armstrong? Are you finding that the owners of the larger complexes are responsive to your needs? I know this has been an ongoing issue.
Absolutely. Over the course of the time that I've been in this office, the relationships with every property manager and even landlords has only grown stronger and stronger. That whenever the opportunity presents itself for us to talk with students at their properties, we take it. Whenever there's an opportunity for us to share an email or information to students, they allow it. And the one thing I will say about the landlords in Mansfield, the majority of landlords in the town of Mansfield, when there's an issue at their property, they do truly care and they do want to get involved, and they often join me in conversations with students. And many times those conversations with landlords and their tenants are much more severe than anything I would offer when I visit, because our conversations are educational in nature.
And the next question is, what do you anticipate for parties and events this year?
I wish I had a crystal ball. One of the things I will say is that with Sergeant King, he and I had an opportunity to meet, and much like Sergeant Knoyer, Sergeant Timmy, and now Sergeant King, who is back in the area and is very familiar with this area, he and I worked together when Richard Knoyer was here as the sergeant. He's familiar with students. He already has a very good attitude of what it means to work with students. He also understands that there's a learning curve that exists when students move off campus, and that learning curve sometimes is steep. Sometimes students get it very quickly. And when it's a steep learning curve, both the state police, myself, and Mike Dintu's office approach it with an ethic of care and an ethic of education and helping them be better citizens of the town of Mansfield, Willington, Ashford, Coventry. A question came up earlier of, do we work with the police in Coventry? Absolutely.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. Armstrong?
Yeah.
Mr. Freudman?
Since you do liaison with police in other towns, are you going with police in other towns to student residences like you're doing here?
We do. Yes.
Okay.
So Coventry is a great example. We have had established a relationship with the Coventry Police. Typically, we liaison with the Coventry Police through our Yukon Police Department. And there have been opportunities where I have gone into Coventry on a number of occasions with Coventry officers, very helpful to attend that meeting with me. And typically, they just accompany me and listen to what I have to say in terms of educating students. So we work with them quite frequently.
But you go to residences of students with police officers in those other towns?
Yes.
All right. Well, I guess we're not going to enter into a debate here. I want to
And
say
Mr. Freudman, the jurisdiction of the other communities we typically work with are all jurisdictions of the state police. So, so Sergeant King, whenever I go in front of the community like Willington, Sergeant King, that is established as part of his jurisdiction as well.
Wasn't ever questioning that he has jurisdiction. Never. I'm just saying that it's not usual police practice in this country, this democracy. I mean, we know we have a real problem in this country with how certain minorities are treated. If there's, there's stop and frisk and, there's a lot. Anyway, you don't have to explain how certain minorities are really treated quite differently than whites. Let's just put it that way. But I'll tell you something. The idea that you go proactively with police, the police, I should say, I blame the police for this. I haven't seen where police proactively go to certain residences, a particular minority, in this case, renters, student renters, and just based on profiling, saying we're going to go talk to them before they've done anything wrong. Usually police get brought into it when somebody has a complaint, 911, or there's a possible causes of action. To go proactively to kind of warn people about how they need to behave, that's not usual police practice. And if it was done with other minorities, it would be a real problem. I'm crestfallen that this kind of behavior disregarding this particular minority, student renters, is allowed. But I'm not convincing anybody of that argument. So I'll move on to something else. I'd like to leave on a positive note. I remember it was about 2.5 years ago, you came to the Town University Relations Committee and you reported that you had gotten, you have this this website, Office of Community Standards, but it's basically inviting people to complain about anything they see a student do. Just turn it into to your office. You don't have to go through the police. And I remember you came in and said you had gotten a complaint from residences. I believe it was down by Eagleville on Schoolhouse Brook Road, where a neighbor who I guess did not like having students living next to her. I think it was a she. Had had complained on your website that there were, and this is quoting you, John, 4 students talking. And I remember you said, well, you brought those students in, which I guess I'm very sorry about, because I don't see where there's a crime in that, but you talked to them and you let the matter go which was appropriate. Now, these people didn't, the neighbor didn't call the police, because the police would probably not have responded, or if they had, they might have said, what are you filing a complaint with us on 911 for something that's innocuous? But so my question to you is, philosophically, do you see that when you have a website which invites people to complain about a particular minority, student renters, you are inviting, it's like putting the scarlet letter on them, saying, we're going to make them, wear some kind of identification. They're different from everybody else. They're marginalized. Do you see where you contribute to such an attitude, where somebody would dare file a complaint through your office about 4 students talking, if you're encouraging that by having a website inviting people to complain about a particular minority? Do you see anything morally problematic with that?
Mr. Freudman, I see it as a good partnership with the community. I see that there are citizens who live in a variety of towns near the university who often will struggle with behavior of students that live next to them. This is an opportunity for us to have that referral made to the university, for us to have a conversation with them. And you're 100% correct. There are times when very little will happen except a conversation, and we talk to those students. And there are some occasions where we do learn that there are 4 students where a community member has said they're being too loud. So I do not see it in any way as negative to have an ability for us to inform citizens, students, faculty, and staff on ways that they can submit a referral from a faculty member in a classroom who's having difficulty with a student to a citizen who's living in the community, to be able to make a referral so that we can work with our students, because what we do as a university is educate our student population to make them better people and citizens. And it is our hope when they leave this university, they are better people than when they got here. Okay. So any sort of referral that we take is educational in nature, and we will continue to do that because it gives us an opportunity to intervene, engage, and help them be better citizens. So I do not see anything wrong with it.
Well, I do. I think it lowers the bar for complaints where people wouldn't have dared file a complaint with the police. They might have even been accused by the police of filing a false police report. But they can file it with you, however bogus it is, and get somebody into trouble. All right.
I will say that the first time that when I visit a student off campus and they realize that they have somehow impacted a citizen around them, the majority of students that I speak with feel very bad about what they've done. And their first inclination is they want to talk to the neighbor and apologize to them. And that is almost 100% of the cases that I work with. And I've been doing this work for a number of years.
Yeah, I want to add a comment. I've been really somewhat distressed by Mr. Freudman's characterization of students as an oppressed minority. They are in fact benefiting from the fact that they are an elite majority. They are benefiting from the fact that the police come to them and give them advice and help them out. Because if they were in fact an oppressed minority, they would be arrested for the stuff that goes on in our neighborhoods when kids get drunk. I mean, this is a group of young people whom we take very careful care of so that they stay out of the prison system, out of the courts. They have opportunities to learn from their mistakes. This is not an oppressed minority by any stretch of the imagination, Mr. Freudman. And I have listened to you make this characterization for several years now, and I really find it offensive. I'm sorry.
What I found offensive is when you were
I did not recognize you, Mr. Freudman, and I'm not going to continue this discussion. I have listened to it long enough, and I just had to put my 2 cents in. I really would like to thank Student Affairs in particular, and Mr. Armstrong and Ms. Doherty for the work that they have done over the years, not only during this pandemic to keep our community safe, but over the many years that we've had working together to find ways of making this community safe for our students as well as for our full-time, long-term residents. This partnership is really a landmark partnership, and when I have spoken to at conferences and met other people from other university communities, we are really ahead of the game on this, and I think it's partly because of the policies we've set out, but it's very much also because of the people we have in place. So I really want to thank both of you for everything you've done so far, and wish you luck for this year, because obviously nobody knows what's going to happen this year.
Thank you. And we're just so grateful for the partnership as well. It goes both ways, Mayor. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Mayor, as well. And I'm going to put something in the chat for folks, is that about our referral system. We actually have made significant improvements in our referral system. And I want to say one last thing about that, is that we learned from our own students that we as administrators knew how to make referrals. We made it easier. I'm going to put in the chat, inform.uconn is a new website that makes it easier for anyone to make a referral to the university for a number of reasons. And we encourage it if there is a need for it, because again, we are 100% about educating our students.
Okay, any further questions for UConn? Well, thank you once again. And as I said before, good luck this year.
Thank you very much.
And we'll obviously be talking with you again as the semester goes on.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Take care, everyone. Be well.
You too.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is Chief Mitchell's update.
Good evening, everyone, and Madam Mayor, thank you. Coming up on 90 days as the fire chief here in Mansfield, and I put together a report that was in your packet tonight, kind of summarizing everything over the observations over the first 90 days, I'm sorry. And
it's been a long time already, huh?
Yeah. What I have is, and I guess Tasha would probably share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation, a short one, just to kind of summarize everything. So I don't hit it.
I'm sorry, but we are not. I've been on with IT, and the share feature, we don't know why it's not showing up along with the chat feature. Everything is turned on, but those two functions are not working for this meeting.
Okay, well, I can read from my PowerPoint.
Oh, actually, I'm going to try something. He told me to try something, but John was already past that point, so I'm going to make you the host.
Tasha, another option, if I provided you a copy of the presentation, you could probably also advance the slides for the chief, correct?
I could, but if I make him the host, then he can just go on share screen if he has it up on his screen, and that should work.
How's that?
And if not,
can everybody see that?
No. There you go.
There it is.
You can all see it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. If everybody's all set, I'll get started. Well, the introduction basically is I started on May 10th, 2021. And over the last almost 90 days now, I've been onboarding. It's been an onboarding process consisting of getting my paperwork together with HR, to meeting the department heads, being introduced by Mr. Aylesworth, the town manager, meeting the department, and also meeting with stakeholders. And including with that is I've met with some mutual aid chiefs. There's a couple more I need to meet with in the smaller departments that border us. I got introduced to the county mutual aid system by attending, and I was introduced by Deputy Jordan at the Tolland County Mutual Aid meeting. And also Chief Franklin set up an appointment. Him and I went up to Talon County Dispatch, and I met the director and his operations manager, and they gave me an overview of how the system works and also a tour of the operation as well. And I was introduced on my first day to the department heads on a nice reception in the morning. So, but one thing I want to note, on March 22nd, Mr. Ellsworth in his report mentioned that he had officially offered me, and I graciously accepted the position, the employment as the fire chief in Mansfield. And I had received an email that night from Deputy Chief Jordan, congratulations. And the next morning I spoke with Chief Franklin. He had reached out to me. And later in the day, I spoke with the administrative specialist for the fire department. And also I spoke with Chief Perez from Yukon, who had reached out to me. So really, a lot of this onboarding stuff kind of started back in March, because shortly after that I was fitted for gear. You know, I had a couple of meetings with Deputy Jordan. I met with Deputy Libros and Chief Franklin. And I also had coffee one afternoon with Mr. Ellsworth. So there's a lot of, and some documents were provided to me to start reviewing. So this kind of started getting me going, introducing me to the department, but also bringing me up to speed on what was, you know, I'd be looking at in front of me. So as far as that goes. And the next slide is the department overview, and I broke it down into different sections. First part is personnel. Department members. You have and it's right under that is you have a skilled group of dedicated, loyal professionals that are committed to not only providing the service to the community, but committed to professional development. You know, one of the things is I look at in the fire service, and over the years, the firefighters are made up of a lot of different skills. It's kind of like a melting pot of different skills that come into the department. And, you know, so some of the things that our members are skilled at, you know, that we can tap these resources to help the department out. We've got a couple of engineers. We have construction workers, heavy equipment operators. We have teachers, professors, electricians, mechanics, fire service instructors, draftsmen, chemists, truck drivers, information technologists, sales. I mean, it's just a vast of, you know, talent that's in this department. And overall, their willingness to work together, because the department, we're a combination department. And, you know, we have our career staff broken up into full-time and part-time. And then we have our volunteers. And in the department right now, which is a great resource to me, is we have approximately 5 past chiefs of the former Eagleville and Mansfield fire departments, the fire company. That's great resources there. And 2 of them were the last sitting chiefs prior to the merger. And I've also reached out and have coffee with both my predecessors, Chief Rayola and Chief Dagan, to get some more background on the department. And our people, you know, they have their firefighter 1, 2. We've got, you know, members who are, you know, have their fire officer 1 and 2. They have their Class B license with Q endorsement. We got a couple of guys with a couple of members with CDL. Safe boating certifications through Connecticut. They've all taken the CPAT, our career staff. In-house training program. And also recently, we have successfully obtained 100% compliance with meeting the certified rescue level technician. And we're going to continue moving that forward with, and our goal is to get our people trained with vehicle and machinery rescue technician 1 and 2, and swiftwater rescue technicians. So those are some of the things, you know, that, you know, the professionalism, but the skills and to even, you know, kind of bring even more skills to the department. So the members, you know, be more proficient, offer more out in the street. Apparatus, Deputy Chief Jordan handles the apparatus maintenance program. Does a phenomenal job with it. Right now, apparatus are going through the preventive maintenance schedule. We have as I said, well-maintained progressive program. We have a progressive replacement program. The apparatus have adapted to the service delivery needs based on staffing. And what I mean by that is right now we have a heavy rescue truck, that has, technical equipment, but some of that equipment's been moved over to the engines, and they'd be redesignated squads by the county designation. So we have more tools that are readily available when we get on scene initially. And then we're going to look at the future needs. We're going to look at the whole fleet and really kind of look at, what we need versus what we have, and accordingly put together a replacement program. The stations, locations of existing stations, we did, as Mr. Aylesworth alluded to earlier, we did a tour recently with Mr. Aylesworth, myself, and facilities director, Alan Carson, and his right-hand man, Bill Trake. We talked about, some of the things that we could look to do with the existing stations, and kind of, adapting to, the needs, because as we are continually dealing with the COVID. One of the things that the department has adopted over recent years is taking a really serious look at and adapted to, cancer initiatives and the clean cab concept, which keeping everything out of the cabs. A lot of the trucks still have air packs and tools in it, while the newer trucks don't have that. So, there's a real push for it in the department, and members are doing a great job with it. And they've done a great job through the COVID. They haven't had to shut down any stations because of, the COVID, which is great. We're going to look at the needed upgrades and also the staffing of the stations, as we move forward. Fire department's made up of different divisions: operations, fire prevention, emergency management, training, and health and safety. Operations, Deputy Chief Jordan and Assistant Chief Thompson, both volunteer officers, handle the operations end. They ensure that we're ready to go, operational readiness. Fire prevention and emergency management is handled by Deputy Libros and Assistant Chief Franklin. They do a phenomenal job with not only the inspections, but with the fire safety programs. Deputy Jordan and I, we meet once a week. Chief Libros and I, we meet at least once a month, just kind of, talk about different things, and they bring me up to speed on what's going on. Training is handled by Captain Morissette, and health and safety is handled by Captain Cornell. Also, Captain Lavitt handles our GIS program and our dry hydrants, and scheduling is handled by Captain Hawthorne. So you see, all our chief command staff all have ancillary duties along with emergency responses, and the four captains, along with running their shifts, they also handle that ancillary programs as well. And even under them, we have other members. We have a firefighter who handles our gas meters. One member handles all our SCBAs and our bottles, ensures that they get tested yearly, and our bottles get hydrostatically tested every 5 years per, OSHA. So there's different members with their different skills that are, not only giving back to the department, but also ensuring that we're that operational readiness. Our external stakeholders. One of my goals has been and will continue to be is to continue to build a mutual aid fire chiefs relationships. We have a great working relationship with UConn, with Willimantic, and also our other mutual aid partners, Coventry, Willington, Ashford. So I just want to strengthen those. That's the goal, working together, because none of us are self-sufficient. We need to rely on one another. So we want to be able to ensure that. Also, we have a new police sergeant who's in charge of the resident troopers here in town. I've met with Sergeant King, and we're going to get together and meet some more once he gets his his legs under the ground a little bit more. I think it's important that we have a strong working relationship, because we're in the public safety business, and you know what? They have one end of the spectrum, we have the other, but we really do, more so now than ever before, come together, because there's so much between working out in the street at auto accidents to a potential, active shooter situation in town, and that you can even expand that to our, the Yukon staff as well, public safety staff. So, my goals continue as I'm, starting to, get to know the department heads is build those relationships and make sure they're strengthening, because, we're all part of a team here. And, in my mind, the fire department is the most important part, but I also recognize that I'm part of an overall team that provides services to this town, and being part of our team leader, Mr. Aylesworth, I recognize that. And you know what? Be available to the citizens of the community. I think that's important to know, that the citizens know that I'm available. If they have any questions, that they can reach out to me via email, make an appointment to sit down and discuss. And that's also with our town's elected officials like yourself, to be able to be available to speak about the fire department. And, part of my job as the chief is to educate and, what we truly do. Areas to address, when I came here, I was provided a copy of the station and staffing study that was conducted. I've reviewed it, I've read it, but we're gonna dive into it some more, as now I start over my first 90 days being able to visibly see what's on that document. The on-duty staffing, the 5-4 model, the firehouses, as I said earlier about the apparatus upgrades and equipment, we're going to put together a program. I think that's important, so we can properly strategically plan out. So that way there is when we can see see things moving forward, that we know we got a plan for. And that's the same thing with equipment. Couple of things that we're looking at right off the bat is kind of starting to look at convert some of our gas powered stuff to battery operated, like our extrication equipment, our ventilation fans. Also start looking at upgrading our gas meters. Gas meters very quickly. A sensor for the gas meter is just as much as replacing the gas meter. So we're going to start looking at that, because some of our sensors are starting to go. We're going to look at trying ways to reduce our response times. We're going to definitely continue to protect our personnel and look at different ways from the COVID-19. And also continue to be proactive in the community, get our fire safety message out, because that's part of our job, is fire prevention. And in closing, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be part of the town of Mansfield and to provide fire and emergency services to the citizens of Mansfield. I look forward to working with the town's stakeholders to move the town of Mansfield Fire Department forward with the goal of providing fire and emergency services to the citizens and visitors of Mansfield that they require and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. That's quite a report. Mr. Aylesworth.
I just wanted to say that I've had an opportunity, over the 3 months or so that that Chief Mitchell served as chief, to see his management style, his leadership style in action, and one of the things I think is a sort of defining characteristic of what's made his early tenure successful is a real eagerness, desire to get out and see what's happening on the ground. Obviously a fire chief, the role is largely administrative. A lot of emphasis placed on administrative skill sets like budgeting and capital planning and these sorts of things. But it's very evident to me that the rank and file appreciate the fact that Chief Mitchell shows up on calls, doesn't hijack what's going on. He has a operations team on the ground to call shots, but very eager to see how things are working and come up with his own informed judgments based on that. I think I've heard breath of fresh air used as a phrase to describe his early tenure by those that he's leading, and very happy that Chief Mitchell's with us.
Thank you.
Well, terrific. A member of the council have any questions? I know this is one of those reports that begins to give us a heads up, so as we head into budget season next year, we know a little bit about what's being talked about.
Yeah.
One of the big issues this year was buying the Quint. Where do you stand on purchasing this new bright and shiny?
Yep.
I don't know what to call it.
Apparatus.
Apparatus, yes. Madam Mayor, right now we have two committees going right now. We have an apparatus committee, and we've had a few demos come into town from the different manufacturers. Actually, we have another one coming into town on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. It'll be at Station 107. And basically what they're doing is they're looking at the truck, the features, and also at the same time, taking it around town to see how it's going to maneuver. And I also have an equipment committee as well to coincide with that truck committee, because once we decide this is the truck that we're going to buy and the spec has been developed, we need to figure out how we're going to lay it out. So and also take a look at what equipment we're going to put on this. As I alluded to earlier, we're looking at extrication equipment, kind of getting away from the gas powered stuff and start transitioning into the battery operated stuff. And the same thing with the ventilation fans as well. Things are starting to go more the battery route and getting away from the cords and also the gas power. So it's an exciting time for the department. This is something new. In my career, I have worked with Quints. They're definitely, you're getting two trucks for the price of one. It's going to have a lot of different features, and our capabilities are going to be enhanced by this truck as a first due piece around town. So I'm excited about it, and I know the members are too.
While folks are asking Chief questions, I just want to say, Fred, might be a good time for you to try to transfer hosting back to Tasha.
Okay. Is that?
And Tasha may need to weigh in on how that's done.
Yeah.
The box, if you go to all of the screen with all of the participants, the box with my name that says Tasha Smith host.
Yeah.
Click on the three dots and it should say make host.
Okay. Oh, make host. Gotcha. Yep.
And then.
Yes. You should. Yep.
Okay. Yep. It says I am the host again.
Okay. Great.
And then at the top of your screen, it should say stop sharing, and that'll take your.
Yep. Jackpot.
Okay, we're all set.
Perfect.
We're all set. Okay, well, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is an added agenda, 10C. Ryan, do you want to take us through that?
Sure, Madam Mayor. So late last week, Governor Lamont issued Executive Order 13A, which basically revised, I believe it was Executive Order 12, I may have the number wrong, but it revised a previous executive order relative to masks and face coverings and basically convey the authority to municipalities to enact their own universal mask orders. The governor has said, at least at this time, that I don't believe he intends to reinstate a statewide mandate on masks, as was in effect for the better part of a year. And this is an attempt to address the public health concern, but giving, I guess you could say, municipalities the latitude to make their own decisions about what they want to do. And so there was some, late breaking discussion, as it were, with the mayor and deputy mayor last week when this executive order was issued to add it to the agenda for discussion tonight. And there is some draft language that was included in your packet to this effect as far as a potential resolution, which was drafted with help from Kevin Deneen, the town's attorney. I do want to say, though, that while, again, there's a draft resolution in the packet, should the council decide that it wants to move forward at this time with a resolution that would ultimately enable me as town manager to issue orders pursuant to the governor's order, that having checked in with my colleagues around the state and participating on various statewide discussion boards and email lists, I know that there's a very high degree of apprehension right now, at least amongst municipal managers, to go this route. And I think some of that concern surrounds what people viewed would end up being like a sort of, patch quilt of regulatory provisions, different towns handling it differently, and ultimately the implications that could have in terms of, pitting one town against another, or resulting in citizens within a community expressing outrage and sort of taking their proverbial business elsewhere. And so, that said, I think, I'll certainly say that on a personal level, I couldn't be more concerned about recent trends, and certainly as again, on a personal level, as a father of 3 young children, fully recognize the grave importance society faces right now of getting the Delta variant under control and getting this whole pandemic under control. It's just a matter of how best to do that, and whether or not a local mandate is the best next step, or a mandate issued at the local level, I should say. And so I actually did want to turn the floor over to Attorney Deneen to fill in any gaps, or speak to what he helped me draft it all and what he's hearing through his channels, because I know he holds the distinction, I think, of heading up the state Municipal Attorneys Association. Is that right, Kevin?
It is. I'm now serving as the president of the Connecticut Association of Municipal Attorneys. So much like Ryan, we have our listservs and email groups going around on that. So the governor's latest executive order really, with regard to the municipal participation, allows and basically kicks the issue back down to the municipal level to decide where they want this to go. And from my discussion with Ryan, it was really sort of a placeholder, I think, to have some discussion with the council. And you'll notice I left a blank in terms of the size. If we were going to, if the council desire was to have the town manager issue this beyond the scope of those facilities that are within control of the town, under the executive order, the town can impose the masking requirements in private businesses and gathering places. So far, New Haven has done that, and I believe Stamford is in the process of doing that, at least as extended to bars and cafes and restaurants. And so from our discussion, there was more to have an opportunity to have a little discussion with the council. Under the statute, it really comes from the chief executive officer, the way the statute reads. But it clearly is something that has major implications for the town. And as Ryan said, I think there's a desire in a lot of towns to try and coordinate this so it's not a hodgepodge or a mixed bag of where things are. So that's sort of the overview from the 50,000 foot level on this.
Kevin, do you think that more towns are going to put a mandatory mask or order into place, or more towns are going to just ask for voluntary mask wearing?
What I've seen so far is that more and more towns are moving to mandatory masks in their facilities. So folks coming into, they're not closing down town halls or other access points, but they are requiring masks even if you've been vaccinated, to enter into those facilities. Other than a couple of the cities in larger, Stamford and New Haven, there hasn't been a real big push in terms of imposing that on private businesses or private gatherings, I think for the same reason that Ryan pointed out.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. And I don't have substantive questions about this, just to state my agreement with Ryan that, or at least with what Ryan was implying, that the way that this has transpired this time around with Governor Lamont is very disappointing, and also to offer my agreement that this is going to create a patchwork of locally issued mask mandates that are going to be very confusing for the public. Unfortunately, this conversation about wearing a mask has become incredibly politicized, and I suspect that there will be political conversations happening in communities across the state about masking or not. And, from my perspective, we are in a situation in Tolland and Windham County right now where the Centers for Disease Control and the Department of Public Health have, in the strongest terms that they're authorized, I think, to say, have urged residents, regardless of their vaccination status, to wear a mask when indoors with other people, especially in places where social distancing might not be possible, or where there's lots of people. And my observation, which is anecdotal, is that at least here in Mansfield, compliance, where mask wearing has definitely become more of a thing over the last several weeks as people have learned more about the Delta variant, but it is definitely not happening at the rate that it was happening when there was a mandate in place at the state level. In particular, among staff at the various retail and restaurant establishments in town. And while I don't know this, I suspect that many businesses are uncomfortable issuing their own mandates, which they've always had the power to do, for the same reason that Ryan cites as a discomfort for communities doing it, that people will react negatively and will take business elsewhere. But I think the public health data is very clear that universal masking at a time when the Delta variant is prevalent, we have a substantial transmission rate in Tolland and Windham County right now, is one of the top ways that we can stop that substantial transmission rate from climbing to a high transmission rate. So I fully acknowledge that this is not a good solution, and that a statewide order from the governor is a much, much better solution for both public health and practical reasons. But we don't have that right now, and it doesn't sound like we're near getting to that point. So I'm in favor of this. I can talk about some of the specific timing context, why, when it comes time to. But yeah, I'm very disappointed that it's being left up to us, and but I still think it makes public health sense for us to issue this order, at least to get the signs back up in the windows of the grocery stores and different other establishments in town that are currently suggesting masking but not requiring it.
There are two parts to the resolution in front of us. One of them is the requirement for masking in municipal facilities, which we've already done and which Ryan has already done. And the second is the mandatory masking in private businesses. So, Mr. Shuren.
I wonder if any of us have heard anything from any private business proprietor to the extent that it might make their life easier to have a town mandate so that they are not put on the spot being criticized by customers.
I can only offer, I think it's a fair point. So I know I've shared this with Tony, or with the mayor and deputy mayor, so I'll just share with the larger group. As you all know, I came to Mansfield from Enfield, New Hampshire. I was a town manager there. And New Hampshire's governor, as again, you all know, and Mr. Shuren would know better than most, being a scholar of such things. State constitutions vary quite a bit state to state. And New Hampshire's governor, by constitution, is not one of the stronger ones in the country. So his interpretation was, he is governor. He did not believe he had the authority I don't think he also wanted to do it politically, but he did not believe he had the authority to issue a statewide mask mandate for patrons of businesses. He did issue a mandate that owners and employees of businesses had to mask, but said that it was ultimately each town's decision whether or not to adopt a mandate. And so all towns had to do that on their own. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was made a local decision. And Enfield actually was an early adopter, did institute a mask mandate. And the response was, at least initially, exactly what you were just saying, that local businesses that otherwise felt like they had to be the bad guy could hang their hat on the local ordinance and say, thanks to the town for kind of leveling the playing field. However, that sort of initial good feeling from the business community of saying, thanks to the town for, not having to pit my business against neighboring business who it doesn't have the requirement, that sort of faded when it came to then towns that had the mandate and towns that didn't. And so the sort of inter-town dispute and that sort of thing. And so I do think in the short term, you could be right that there could be some positive spin on that. But it's not clear how it would play out in the longer term.
Do we have any idea what Wyndham is contemplating?
I've not seen Mr. Rivers, my counterpart in Wyndham, weigh in on any of the discussion boards. I will certainly reach out to him directly. I can say as far as our neighbors, Coventry, Tolland, etc., it doesn't sound like this is a direction that they're planning to go. Folks have instituted mask requirements in their municipal buildings. Most did so by the end of last week, if not the earlier portion of the week like we did. But I've actually yet to hear of any towns in our immediate area or across the state, at least that have responded to the thread I started this morning, saying that they were planning to go this route.
Ms. Berthelot?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a very good idea. I absolutely think, I agree with Mr. Shaken, that we should require masks. And for me, it's maybe too painfully obvious in the sense that we've already made a decision to go virtually with our town council meetings. And this most essential part of government, of having people be able to participate, we've made the decision there. And there's an enormous amount of information out there that's just unknown and new, and the scientists haven't been able to process it yet. CDC is clearly saying we should mask. It's unfortunately not been consistently ahead of the game in terms of telling folks what to do, but it is definitely saying to mask now. There's inconsistent information about whether those of us who are vaccinated could potentially infect other people who are more vulnerable. At this point, there are lots of vulnerable people in our community. There are lots of older people in our community who may be vaccinated, but they seem to be more likely to actually get COVID. And we've got masses of kids under 12 who can't be vaccinated. It only makes sense. Wearing a mask is such a minor thing to do, and obviously a very effective thing to do. And I'm aware that it's a shame. It's a terrible shame that Governor Lamont is not taking a leadership position on this. But I think that we need to, that with all of the students coming into town, with people being concerned about the students coming into town, with the fact that UConn is not yet mandating that faculty and staff be vaccinated, I think that this is the appropriate thing to do. It's not really very radical to ask people to mask up in public spaces that are inside.
Mr. Shaken?
I'm just raising my hand for a motion if there weren't other questions. So I will yield if there are. Okay, then I will put the motion on the floor. Move effective today to adopt the following resolution authorizing the town manager to issue orders pursuant to Governor Lamont's Executive Order 13A. I'll read it since it wasn't in our packet, and since there's a blank in it, I'm going to put a number in the blank. resolution authorizing the town manager, etc. Resolved that the town council, in light of the continuing spread of the COVID virus and specifically the increased risk posed by the Delta variant of the COVID virus, hereby authorizes the town manager, Ryan Ellsworth, to issue such orders as he deems appropriate regarding the wearing and use of facial coverings and masks pursuant to CJS 8-28A and Executive Order 13A issued by Governor Lamont on August 5th. And further be it resolved that the town endorses and supports any such order which A, requires the wearing of facial coverings and or masks in all indoor facilities owned, maintained, occupied, or under control of the town of Mansfield, regardless of vaccine status, and B, requires the wearing of facial coverings and or masks in any indoor setting or facility located within the town of Mansfield, which is open to the public and has an occupancy of greater than 25 persons, whether owners, employees, guests, or visitors, regardless of vaccination status.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot seconds.
If I could
speak to your motion, Mr. Shaken.
Yeah, in addition to what I said before, I think there's an important piece here, the sort of why is Mansfield doing this if only New Haven and Stamford have also done this or are in the process of doing this right now. Besides that, I think it's a good idea and more communities ought to do it. I think we are in a particularly unique situation here, given the impending influx of 12 to 15,000 people, granted, many of whom, the vast, vast majority, as we just heard from UConn, will be vaccinated, which is wonderful. But regardless, we are expecting them to move in to campus over the next several weeks into our town. And as everyone knows, that is a period of time when there is a pretty significant interaction between the student population and folks who live in Mansfield on a day-to-day basis, lots of grocery shopping, lots of restaurant going with families. I think it's naive to expect that there will be no instances of breakthrough COVID infections among the vaccinated population returning to UConn. I think it's clear that, to me at least, that we need to be prepared for that eventuality to occur over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And so I think having the town be prepared for that with a mask mandate in place in those establishments that are open to the public is good policy. I think it would be good policy to protect the people who work in those facilities, who are going to be interacting closely with people all day long, and also to protect the citizens of town. I appreciate, I think, the concern that there aren't a lot of other towns doing this right now. I think it's going to change, just like we're seeing news about employers mandating the vaccine changing very rapidly. I think this is something that will also change rapidly. I'll again echo and say again, I really hope Governor Lamont changes course and does something on a statewide basis. And then I'll just close by sharing a little anecdote. I was in Boston last weekend for a night and did two things. I went to the Boston Museum of Science, and then I went on a whale watch the next day. And at the Boston Museum of Science, they had these signs up front that said, we are strongly recommending that everyone wear a mask, regardless of vaccine status. And not very many people had masks on. And on the whale watch, they had people standing at the dock handing masks to people and said, we're mandating masks if you're inside the cabin of the boat. And everyone wore a mask inside the cabin. And there's a difference between a suggestion and a mandate. And there's a difference when you look around and you see everyone else doing something, you deciding to do it as an individual. And I think that's something that I've observed as a difference between today and maybe April, before the indoor mask mandate was lifted, when a high proportion of the population was vaccinated too. People were more likely to wear a mask inside the grocery store, inside a restaurant, et cetera, when it was required. And when they looked around, they saw everybody else doing it. And I think that's, from a behavior changing, how can we change behavior perspective, why this is important for us to do now, especially as we're preparing for in-person learning to go back in full in our school system with children who can't be vaccinated at the exact same time that we're expecting a significant influx of people from around the country and the world moving back to Mansfield as they do every year. So I hope my colleagues will support this. Thanks.
Mr. Shuren.
Just a question about the number 25, which seems a bit high to me. And I wonder if there's any specific reason that number was picked to be inserted here.
I picked it as a number that seemed large enough that it might not cover a neighborhood or family gathering, but would be small enough to cover most of our indoor retail or restaurant establishments in town, but not for any other or more specific reason than that.
I mean, if I go into Dunkin' Donuts, rarely do I think there are 25 people in there.
I think there's a distinction between the number of people that happen to be in an establishment at a given time versus like its rated fire capacity of like what that venue would hold. So we might need to clarify that. But Kevin, is it the latter? Is that the number you're looking for? Like what the physical space would allow?
And that was the intent, excuse me, and as I mentioned, under the statute, the town manager would be issuing the actual order. And I think what I anticipated was having this as a point of discussion, and if the council is supportive of that, Ryan and I can work together to get the wordsmithing and the detail for the retail establishments, the restaurants, the shops and food stores and things like that. So if the council was not supportive of this, we didn't really want to get too far ahead of where the council was in terms of mandating this type of situation.
Any other comment? I am sensing that the council is in favor of this pretty much. Mr. Shaken, briefly.
Thank you for the second time. I just wanted to note, Kevin just said something that jogged my thinking. Just an important distinction here that this is something that's under Ryan's control, and I think the council is likely giving Ryan's pretty clear direction about our opinion. But you know, as I'm sure was discussed before I was able to join us tonight, Rob Miller's on vacation, and my hope is that everything that Ryan does as he manages the COVID emergency in Mansfield is being done, you know, in consultation with the real public health experts we have at the health district, and that that he consult with Rob as he's figuring out how to make this work in town, and also consult with Rob if it becomes clear that something like this is no longer needed, that it can be lifted. But you know, we are in a particularly tough timing situation because of Rob's absence right now, and the fact that the council is not planning a regular meeting again until well after students have gotten back to campus.
All right. Does anybody else wish to comment? All right. Is there anybody who's going to oppose this resolution? Anybody wish to abstain? Then I declare that this motion has been adopted unanimously. Okey-doke. On to reports of council committees. Finance?
Yes, we met earlier this evening before the town council meeting, and we discussed both the transition. Charmaine gave us an update on the transition with the new finance software, and that's a very modest term for a very complicated product. And one of the reasons why, well, it won't cost us more money, but that it's going to take longer than originally anticipated to work with all the, various entities that we support through shared services as well. And then we spent the balance of the time talking with our financial advisor about projected debt servicing, both currently, and then with the addition of the anticipated new school, and those notes will not be issued yet, as well as the Mansfield Middle School roof project. And then what we didn't have a chance to talk about, but we'll move to the next meeting, is also to talk with him about what are the best options for municipal financing right now, bonds or borrowing through the commercial markets. We didn't try to prejudge this issue. It's a question that's come up a couple of times, and we wanted to at least get some perspective on it. So but that is an issue. He'll come back to our next meeting, whether virtual or in person, and we'll conclude that discussion.
Thank you. Personnel?
Thank you, Mayor. We also met earlier this evening. We had a special session. We are continuing the work on the town manager's 6-month evaluation. You all were mailed some confidential materials. I ask that you keep them confidential. It's super important because there are personnel issues. Unfortunately, it was our hope that we would wrap up our draft executive session to present to you later this evening. Unfortunately, because we went virtual, the rug sort of got pulled out and we weren't able to move as quickly as I had hoped. So we are not prepared to have the executive session this evening and hope that that will be on the agenda for our next town council meeting.
That's unfortunate. All right. Committee on Committees.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll be meeting on Thursday to go over a few things, and that's when I'll have an update for the next meeting.
Committee ad hoc on housing.
So we were going to be meeting on Wednesday, but because of vacation schedules, we're going to be meeting again in September to really hit the ground running with getting that housing trust going and some proposals to bring back here into the planning and zoning.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is departmental and advisory committee reports. Any comments, questions? There's the under petitions, requests, and communications. You will see that Linda Painter has recommended some additional amendments to planning and zoning rules. I gather that they're on the planning and zoning agenda because it takes them longer. Ms. Painter is with us. Could you please explain what these are?
Good evening, everyone. As the mayor mentioned, you do have a referral from the Planning and Zoning Commission related to amendments to the zoning regulations for the manufacture and sale of alcohol. You will see a few additional permits there. One of the things we have is that the last time the council discussed this, there were some questions as to whether or not we should expand the list of permits to include things such as farm breweries, et cetera. And quite frankly, given the amount of time it takes the Planning and Zoning Commission due to statutory requirements, we actually included that in a draft that they considered at their August 2nd meeting, not knowing whether or not the council would want to move forward with adding new things at this time. I think, as Mr. Shaken indicated earlier, the big issue is the Planning and Zoning Commission ultimately will decide where you can have different types of permits. But even if they were to add things such as farm distilleries, farm breweries to the list of uses in certain districts, no one would be able to seek that permit until the ordinance was changed. So if the council ultimately decided not to include those uses or those types of alcohol permits, then it would be a moot point from planning and zoning. But again, the time frame to change the zoning regulations is a little bit longer. For example, we are required to give a 30-day notice to the Council of Governments, both for our town and surrounding communities on certain types of amendments. So that was the reason for moving quickly, particularly given the two businesses that we had, and just trying to anticipate what the council might be looking at in the future.
Any questions for Ms. Painter? Seeing none, thanks very much for the clarification. As you probably heard, we will have an ad hoc committee to take a look at some of these things over the next month or so. Any items for future agendas? Ms. Berthelot, you're muted.
Sorry. As y'all probably recall at our last meeting, Dr. Kalita Cotton asked us to consider making a donation to the COVID-19 remembrance ceremony that they'll be holding in Wyndham, and they're including our town in this event. And I'm wondering if we could put that as an agenda item for our next meeting.
Sounds like a good idea. They're planning to hold this in early October, am I right?
Correct.
So some action should be taken fairly quickly. Okay. We don't need an executive session having to do with personnel, is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. I see Mr. Ellsworth has his hand up.
I just wanted to alert the mayor that while we may be substituting one executive session for another, if we're not doing that if that executive session isn't planned, there was an intent to have an executive session, although I think it'll be very brief tonight, with Attorney Deneen relative to strategy and negotiations with respect to pending claims or litigation in accordance with Connecticut General Statute subsection 1-200 6B. And then
I gather Mr. Shaken is making that motion.
And invite to it Ryan and Kevin and Linda. So moved.
Okay. Is there a
inviting
second?
Ryan, Kevin, and Linda.
So is there a second to Mr. Shaken's motion?
Harry.
Come on, somebody's got a second. Ms. Berthelot, thank you. Okay, so we can go into executive session, after which we will adjourn and hold a non-notice meeting. All those in favor of going into executive session, is there anybody objects to going into executive session? Anybody who abstains? I think Mr. Frattoni has abstained. All right, then I declare that we are in executive session. So we'll just have to clear out a few people and we'll come back in 2 minutes.